G'day, God Seekers. We are going to revel in depravity and talk about this new Hedonites of Slaanesh. If I can get it off the table, it's a little bit sticky. Not that type of sticky. Don't get your head out of the gutter. I am joined by the depraved Edgar Hernandez from the East Coast, one of the top Slaanesh players on the ITC. And we're going to break this book a little bit down. It's a new book. It's hit the shelf, about 2 weeks ago, maybe, I think it is. And obviously, as the time of recording, this is pre any FAQs or erratas. So things may change if you're watching this in the future. But today really is very much a first thoughts around how a top performing player is looking at the new faction, the strengths, the weaknesses, the things that they want to get out of the book, and maybe for some considerations for you if you're going to get into Slaanesh. But Edgar, g'day, welcome. Introduce yourself. Where are you from? Any clubs you want to give representation to and shout outs?
Coach, yeah, I really appreciate you having me on board for the show. We're looking very excited and hyped up for Slaanesh. And, it's been a long 2 years with the previous book and where the first one really brought us. So I'm really excited to come on board and talk about what the new strategies are with this book and also to see where the changes are, what got glow ups, and what is kind of almost there, but just not quite there yet. But I'm hailing from Pennsylvania on the East Coast of the US, part of the Bottom Table Bullies Club. So shout out to them, shout out to the whole team. And just really excited to bring Slaanesh back to the table. I've been running them for the last couple of years since the first book, a little bit of other armies sprinkled in there, but it's just been Slaanesh for me the whole time. And, I'm really excited to bring it. Folks at events, they look at their army, it's like, I've never played this. So it's like, let's really just dive back into it and find out where we need to take this army for the next step.
Slaanesh is one of my all-time favorite aesthetic armies. Like when I think about the Chaos Gods, Slaanesh is number one. Like Slaanesh and Tzeentch are the top tiers for me, but Slaanesh is number one. Then I look at Khorne and Nurgle and things like that. It's the most beautiful army, and I love everything about Slaanesh. I'm probably more of a demon as opposed to a mortal. But I got to ask you, before we kind of get into the meat and the potatoes of this book, have you paid for the sins of the past? Because I don't know when you started, but I remember the very first experience of Slaanesh properly, or one of the sins of the past, is you used to fight first on a 2+. And the amount of times you'd get you'd summon a free keeper, you'd have two keepers and the lawnmower chariot in my face, turn one or turn two, double fighting. There's some mad, ridiculous stuff that was happening at the time. And you got away with it. And then GW nerfed you to the sun, and you've been paying for those sins ever since. I'll never forget, Edgar, when we looked at I was looking at a points review, I can't remember, a couple of years ago, and there's Daughters of Cain Bow Snakes at 170. You had Lumineth Sentinels at 170, and they're all doing mortal wounds for days, ignoring line of sight, double shooting. And then was it Blitzbarb Archers for 170? And I'm like, you're just paying for the sins of the past. There's no way that those three War Scrolls were the same top tier quality. So when you look at this new book, have you paid for the sins of the past? Have we finally gotten over those strike first rubbish?
I think this book really takes us finally into our own realm and lets us finally get away from those sins. Slaanesh is breaking a little free from those chains, and I think the power is seeping into the book a little bit, and it's a lot of fun. It gets away from that overpoweredness that we had before, and where we had everyone just striking last in melee. And then on our side, GW didn't really let us get away with it. They made it a little bit more powerful with that Celeste battalion that could just give you double depravity. I think that's what really set it over the top, and is like, okay, I know you're summoning 3 extra keepers per game. How about we make it 6? Because there wasn't any limits to how many things you can summon in a turn back then. So it was just absolutely insanity, and we had some fun with it. The shooting meta kind of came in a little bit between there in 2021, 2022. And the new book also just kind of let us play with our War Scrolls, but not with an actual book or faction ability. So, we made the best of that opportunity. The chariots, they were really, really fun. You could summon 2 of them as well in the past, but now the book really brings that all together, adds a lot of flavor. And what I see a lot of folks talking about is just playing with a lot of that background, very Slaanesh style, dipping more into different sins other than lust and gluttony. Now we're getting into a little bit of hubris and all that good stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. And maybe we get a Lord of Avarice next or something mounted. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, okay. I'm all for like the boob snack coming back. I don't know. I've got it on my shelf. It's going to be a part of my Armies on Parade, but look, I love the Slaanesh book. It sings to me the way I like to play, and we'll get into the rules in a minute. We'll talk about like temptation dice. We'll talk about like the different things in the book. But before I get into like the things that I really want to get into, do you like it? Do you like this new book? Do you think, when I say do you like it, do you think it is a net positive? Like, yeah, you lost some things, but you probably gained more than you lost. Or do you think Slaanesh as a faction has gone backwards and they'll be performing even worse than they were competitively, in the next coming season?
So yeah, just to kind of look at it from this perspective, when we had those Blitzbarbs at 170 and the War Scrolls had to carry the book, the army had to jump through a lot of hoops, a lot of mind games, a lot of positioning, a lot of overcosted units that would cause these hoops to come up that you would have to jump through only to still lose, even though you did everything right. The army just couldn't really handle itself. And you needed a little bit of help from your opponent and the dice to kind of push you ahead a little bit and win by that 1 point. But now the book has a lot of flavor, a lot of opponent interactions where may I offer you this 6 in this trying time and all this good stuff that just makes it really fun and manipulates the dice a little bit to just really have those laughs with your opponent, make those decisions, get in their head a little bit. And also kind of get in your head as well with, the rules we'll get into, but ultimately, it's a lot of fun. The blast that I've been having with my opponents, even though some are just getting into Age of Sigmar or just trying to finally dip into chaos, the temptation in real life has finally gotten to them, and it's exciting to see. But the book is very fun. The models, having some of the more newer sculpts has just been really nice to build up, paint. I've already got folks coming to me with conversion ideas, and this is beautiful. Let the sin begin is the theme with the army, at least with the models, but keep it reasonable.
Are they still competitive is the question, because I've heard you refer to fun a few times, and I agree with you. It's an absolutely fun book, but is it competitive? Is it going to be as bust as gets? Do you think that it's still going to be competitive, but it's not an easy victory, or are you just in the bin?
I believe it's competitive. It's not going to be an easy victory in my opinion. The army used to just be a glass without the cannon. Now we have a cannon and can really make use of the abilities in the army to kind of reduce the glass a little bit. But I believe this army is competitive, not to the Gits level. They deserve to be where they're at right now for a little bit. I'll give you that. But Slaanesh, we had our fun in the sun a little bit in the past. Had to pay for it, but now are brought back in line where we should be very easily achieving 3-2s, 4-1s at events. And then some matchups at the moment, just seeing meta watches and, what's being covered as the top armies, give the army a bit of a challenge in those top tables. But we definitely have the tools to pull through and make it happen.
Do you think you mentioned the meta watch and the balancing, right? Because especially when you look at a Chaos army, they're always split between two factions. You've got the mortal side and you've got the demon side. And I was just talking to Korn last week, and I think, and we both agree that the demon side is probably a bit more stronger and competitive than the mortal side. Do you think the same is true? Like, do you see demons and mortals differently? Do you see them at the same kind of power level? Do you see them mixing? So actually you have more of a robust army than just a split mortal and a split demon. Like, how do you see that?
All right. So I really see the mortals being a little bit stronger than the demons at this point. The demons got some nice war scrolls and some combinations that, really make you think about how you want to get into the list. And as we continue to explore the book and see some of these glow-ups on the table, I think the demons will really seep into more lists. Me personally, I saw some ideas for 15 Seekers, and so I tried 15 Seekers today, and it was pretty sweet. So I think it's really, really powerful with some of the War Scroll combinations we have, but The mortals, the models are just beautiful. It's what attracts a lot of people and what attracted them before with the old book until they found out there wasn't a book. And so the models are just fantastic for all sorts of conversion ideas, all sort of themes into the sins, and just overall representing Slaanesh. And so I think people will love those new sculpts. Beast of Chaos players, even now having their Slangor in their army, they love having some new updated models. Zangor, I think, were the old book, and they were kind of nice, but now you get Slangor that can maybe deep strike off the edge and try to roll an 8.
Yeah, Slangor slap now. I'm going to bring up the rules in a second, but there's one question I want to ask you before we get to that point is, if I'm someone who is brand new to Slaanesh, maybe I'm at my game store and I'm looking at it at the shelf, or maybe I've just picked up the tome for the first time, how would you describe this as a faction in regards to what is it good at, what isn't it good at? Like, how would you describe its play style, just at a very high level?
All right, very good. So for anyone interested in Slaanesh, you are looking to dive into a very nice updated range of models, lots of speed. When looking at the rules in general, like, the army's strength is its mobility. It now, like I said earlier, has a little bit of cannon and punch, so it can really just go up to an opponent and kind of slap in the face a little bit. But the main strength here with this army is that there's a lot of layers. There's auras and buffs that we need to take into account. Debuffs that apply to our opponent just to make our army a little bit more resilient. So you having some measuring sticks, having your tape handy at all times, because this army, you want to make sure you stay in those auras and in those buff ranges. So game accessories, you really can go all in with this army and really settle in. Chaos is a little spoiled, and Slaanesh has a lot of allies as well. So being able to dive into different factions and pull from their good stuff also fits really well with this force. While Hedonites, it's the buffs only tend to affect Hedonites, just like with most of the Chaos books being updated. We have a lot of play with our allies, and some of our depravity generators actually work really well off of coalition or regular allies. So there's play with that. But for anyone looking to dive into the army, it is a project and I don't want to say an errand of love with this army, since it's not something you can really blast through really quickly. You really want to take your time with the mortals if you're doing it. The demons, if you're trying to have stuff ready to summon, and not to dissuade anybody in any way, but in the past, we had to bring almost 2 armies to an event just to be able to summon whatever we needed in the force. We don't need that anymore. So any of those articles or any news like that from the past, no longer have to worry about. We don't even have to summon anymore, to be honest. And
you can still summon, so you can still bring on tape, but it's not like your army. And there was kind of like one of the big difference between the old book and the new book. Is the old book was a lot about summoning on extra models than your 2,000 points or whatever your army list was. This definitely still has the summoning mechanics, but it's not necessarily your only tool in your toolkit. And when we bring up the rules in a second, it absolutely will show it. But from what I'm hearing from you, Edgar, is that you're a melee-focused army, but you're not only melee. You've got a bunch of shooting attacks as well. You've got some magic, but you're not the strongest magic. You're not like Tzeentch. You don't have any priests. You have a deep roster of things that you can access through your other legions of chaos that we'll literally talk to in a second. But overall, like, you got a lot of tools in your toolkit, but speed and like melee is probably, well, not even melee. Speed is like your killer. Like that's the big thing. And I will find out from you how you use it as we go through this episode, because this game is not a combat game. It is not a shooting game. It is primarily a movement game, and the rest of it all plays into it. So we'll show you how Slaanesh kind of works there.
Absolutely, especially with being able to play in all phases of the game. This army just does it. Hero phase, obviously the movement shenanigans and the speed, shooting, very excellent shooting. And then in melee, of course, one of our allegiance abilities requires us to really focus around that. So we'll really get into that.
I'm going to start off on the right-hand side. Normally, I would start, on the left, and we'll talk about the Legions of Chaos. But I think for us, I'm going to pause that one for a second. Let's start with the rules, and let's start with temptation dice. So the way that you now generate depravity. So if you're an old player coming over to the new book, it's a little bit different. You used to have to like chip wounds and have for every wound you gain a bunch of dice and blah, blah, blah. That's no longer there. It was weird. But you've got this new temptation mechanic. And basically every battle round, you get 6 dice that you can offer your opponent if they have a failed hit, a failed wound, or a failed save roll. If they accept your temptation dice, they can change that roll to a 6. If they decline, they will take D3 mortal wounds. If they accept, then you generate D6 depravity points to go along with it as well. So there's a little bit of interactivity kind of here, and I guess it sounds like a really fun mechanic, but I want to kind of get to the practicality of it. If you and me are at a table, like as a Slaanesh player, what are good times for you to offer temptation dice, or even just how do you think about this mechanic at a competitive lens?
So I like to make sure my opponent's aware that these are only ever going to go off for those hits, wounds, or save rolls that they fail. And as a player that is looking at the most advantageous times to give these, resulting in either the D3 mortal wounds or the D6 depravity that can get me to my next bracket or my next buff at the different levels, I want to make sure that I am giving it at the best moment. So high damage attacks that could really hurt me, or a save roll on something that I really need to get rid of on the table, wouldn't be the times that I really want to give this away unless I am close to the next buff, and it would be worth it in the short term, long term in that case. But ultimately, an opponent is often very incentivized to just take the damage and keep me away from my buffs. And players that notice that will see, all right, a -1 to hit, the mortal wounds and the ward saves that can come from this when we get closer to that, really tend to make the army very tough. So they may just not want to take the chance of us getting to those buffs later in the game or closer to us summoning something pretty strong to affect the board state. They may want to take the damage. But for me, I really like the idea of interacting with my opponent a little bit more. It does require me kind of stopping the rhythm of dice rolling every now and then when, they're rolling their hits. And it's like, oh, hang on. I see some misses here. Let's offer you this die here. So, you have this extra decision. But it kind of goes into a little bit of that interaction that's really fun with your opponent, but a bit of at a competitive level also kind of puts these extra thoughts in their mind that, all right, what if I do this? What if I do this? Kind of forcing some tough decisions that are ultimately in the favor of the Slaanesh player. So an opponent to any Slaanesh armies will just need to really stay sharp as to what their opponent is trying to do with offering damage on this hero that kind of had a mediocre attack, or if it's just a maw crusher or something on 1 or 2 wounds left that is trying to get out of combat and clear itself, or continue to initiate its smashing and bashing or something, and all those 2 or 3 mortal wounds could really just finish that whole sequence off. So it's just something very critical to think about. And for me, I am planning to offer my opponent some treats, maybe a little bit of a sugar crush or sugar rush maybe helps. If they don't want it, it's okay. But I think it's just very nice interaction with your opponent at an event, just a little refreshing, and could get you best player award.
It's very sweet. When I look at this, right, because you're right, like, okay, so you can offer it to them and it makes sense to offer it at low volume attacks, right? You're up against a Terrorgeist in Grizzlegore. You don't want to be offering it to the more attacks where it can do 6 mortal wounds if it does a 6. Or you're up against a Mega Gargant, I don't know, a Gatebreaker, and it has like damage 4 or something ridiculous. So avoiding those types of high damage, high rend, those opportunities are probably not the best times to do it. But to your point, if they're on 1 to 2 wounds left, if they decline it, then the mortal wounds actually might kill them. So they're more likely to accept it. So there's a game within a game. And I think as someone who is new to the faction, it could be hard to work out when is the right time to do it. And even, a failed hit, a failed wound, or a failed save roll, I'm more inclined to do it on the hit as opposed to the wound, purely because, they might get a 6 to hit, but they could still fail the wound roll. But if I give them the 6 to wound, then it's going to go into the armor save. So at least when I do it on a hit, there's another failure spot. How do you look at that? Like, are there particular times or moments, or is there things like, give me advice, like when are good times practically throughout the game to offer a temptation dice on the failed hit, the failed wound, and by the way, if you've got a unit that's failed like, I don't know, 6 attacks, you can't offer them all 6 dice at the same time. It's only 1 dice in the sequence.
Right, for sure. Just one unit per phase can receive a temptation from Slaanesh. So in these cases, then the best times to really offer your opponent these dice would be on the hit roll, since it necessarily does not convert, and it has that chance of failure, as you mentioned. But ultimately, with the very good shooting that Slaanesh has in its arsenal, you really tend to offer these as part of a save roll for a shooting attack, usually on something that might be a little important. Sharpshooters hasn't really seen a lot of play, but now in Slaanesh can really become a very useful tool for being able to target those Galatian champions in the GHB, or a unit that your opponent is really potentially putting a lot of importance or trying to lean on, that they might need their models for. A screen, maybe, when one of our fast melee units is trying to get up there. The D3 mortal wounds, instead of that save, is going to make our opponent think twice. They may want to keep their Grey Seer, their Scragrot, their other very important piece that is just kind of hiding in the back and not really expecting to get shot at. But when they see those sharpshooters and maybe some of the archers that we have in our arsenal, they may be inclined to take this temptation dice. But as a Slaanesh player, you want to do it at the, depending on your play style, at the most fun moment, or if you're really trying to get a plan and execute it into a unit that your opponent is very likely inclined to give you the D6, because it is just so valuable as, you know, one of the 2 primary methods of generating depravity.
Yeah, it's obviously hard for us to pinpoint specific moments, people, that this is when you use the depravity dice. It's very much about the sequence and the flow of the game. And you know, there's lots of different things, but I think, you know, just pointing up, for example, targeting attacks to a minor hero because they either can accept it and generate depravity, or if they fail, if you're shooting or attacking a 5 wound idiot, they can't afford to take D3 mortal wounds, because D3 can be 3. And just 2 of those sequences could pop your 5 wound hero. So the risk is definitely a lot higher. But if you do it to my battle line troops, I can probably take to D3. I don't care. In most cases, like, it's okay. And I could go on and use a rally. I could go use a whole bunch of things to bring these units back to life. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here, and thank you for following along with me, is you've got to think about, and you're going to have to like work it out and play around with it to see where exactly do you use depravity your temptation dice to make the most of it. Don't accept that your opponent is going to accept all 6 of your dice each battle round, because it could be an easy way to generate so much depravity with a D6. But think about what happens if your opponent turns you away 6 times a battle round. Yeah, that's 6d6 worth, 6d3 worth of mortal wounds. But what does it mean to depravity? And if your battle plan is focused around generating depravity, then you've got to think of other ways to get the depravity if your opponent isn't accepting it. Edgar, what would you say to that? And is there anything you'd add or challenge me on?
So this army really wants to generate its depravity to really get those abilities and potentially threaten those summons. So it's really critical that as the player with these die, you try to offer it to those really critical units. And you're correct about Battle Line or other units not really mattering when it comes to these, but if it could potentially really take that Battle Line unit down because you already shot it with something else and didn't offer it, then your opponent is now inclined to probably take it or lose the unit. When it comes to more elite armies, your Stormcast Eternals, potentially Slaves of Darkness, they might be inclined to take it if it's something that doesn't have a ward save. So those units really can't afford to lose models to this damage, so you're at a bit of an advantage here, especially with some of the save stripping that we're going to get into later. But this army wants to generate its depravity points, and the D6 is very valuable. Your opponent will know this at a level, and if they don't know it, we'll find out with a little bit of pain.
I will say my last comment on the dice is I mentioned that, it's kind of useless against battle line, and that's probably not quite true because there are situations where it could play a part. You could be contesting an objective, and those D3 mortal wounds might remove a couple of models that make it from the opponent holding it to you holding it. It could be the difference between a battle shock test and not losing any models in a battle shock test. So there obviously are situations, and if you're in combat, you obviously can't rally. There's lots of things to come into play, but I think the point that we've both made is be smart with the opportunities and where you try to use the depravity, and really try to make your opponent, your ideal state is getting your opponent to go, damn, I don't want to take the D3 mortal wounds, but I also don't want to give you the D6 depravity. I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, as opposed to, the easy answer is to take the D3 mortal wounds because I have 60 grots I don't care about, and I've got regeneration for days. Sure, I'll take the D3 mortal wounds.
Yes, absolutely. Make them make those decisions. Pick the worst of the two. The D6 is the one that's in our favor for sure. And opponents will definitely realize this. And after a couple reps and knowing where your opponents are usually taking these die, will really make for a better experience with this mechanic and this allegiance ability. We want to get to that 36, 24, 12 thresholds eventually.
And we'll show you very soon after on the next page what you get for your depravity points, because you can summon and you get different rules. So I'll get to your thoughts in a minute. But you've also got other ways to generate depravity. One example is through euphoric killers, where once per turn at the start of the combat phase, you can pick a friendly Hedonites of Slaanesh unit, and basically, what is it? It's you gain a depravity point for each wound and mortal wound caused by attacks that from that friendly unit into that enemy unit. So you got one unit in combat within 1 inch of an enemy unit. You pick those two, and basically you're generating depravity off those attacks. How do you see that, and what do you think about as a good example of something that could use euphoric killers?
So yeah, this ability is fantastic, and it's a bit of a callback to our very first book where we could gain depravity off of doing damage to units with more than one wound. So I really like this callback, and gives us a lot of control and flexibility of finding a target on our opponent's army as a unit to really run up to and try to generate these depravity points from. So fast cavalry and the use of our mobility will really let us pick the fight where we want to extract and farm the most depravity points from. Fast units like Seekers or the Immortal Slickblades are going to really benefit from this and be the first target. Some heroes as well, the Mask, being able to fly around a little bit, could be a really first choice for this, but the fast cavalry units will be the very first depravity generators with euphoric killers, and just really making sure that they go into a unit where they can use the most of their abilities. But fast cavalry is the way to go. Later in the game, our heroes, our slower infantry can really try to farm off of this ability, but this is usually going to be the very first way that we get to the first benefits and really see the flow of that depravity and the sweet abilities from Slaanesh that come through.
Other units that I think that would really benefit from this would be things like the Keeper of Secrets, or if you take Shellaxi, although I probably wouldn't do Shellaxi in my opinion, I'd rather just go a Keeper. Sigvold kind of stands out to me as someone who is a good recipient of this, especially if you do bring in a coalition war altar shrine. I always confuse the two. Yeah, because there's war altars and there's war shrines, but using things like, as you mentioned, they're a little bit slower, but they are good recipients throughout the game. Is there any other units that you think that might have a high volume of attacks or a high amount of opportunity to cause mortal wounds that also, your cavalry, the Keeper, Sigvold, anyone else that could be a good recipient?
The very best recipient on that type of elite infantry would probably be your Slangor. And then when you kind of get to the heroes, you try seeing the Epitome in some of our builds. Celeste is surprisingly killy with the amount of damage they can do. They have some really nice output, but they're the ones that you would normally try to target with this ability mid-game, later in the game, to just really push you over the threshold. these high volume of attack units will really get it. And then we start dipping into demonettes, which if you're really trying to get into them, it's just a high volume amount of attacks. And once we get into some of the relics and abilities in these sub-factions, there's ways to really juice it to the max. So it's just really good. Ultimately, though, I like the cavalry idea for your first early generators, and then the heroes that we're putting around our list. Even Glutos, he has a nice amount of attacks and high damage attacks too. Become fantastic recipients. Everyone in the army can use it, and if you're one unit in your turn that ended up needing to make the charge, or some Bliss Barb archers, let them be the unit to receive this ability, and just score a little bit of depravity.
Yeah, I was going to call that out. I'm not saying that if you're not running a keeper, you don't pick that unit, but obviously they're good things to consider as a fallback for euphoric killers. But yes, take this super situation as it comes up. Especially think about what's going to cause the most wounds or what's going to cause the most mortal wounds. So you probably already know those offensive powers. But it's an interesting ability. It's a cool ability. It is a throwback to the old way, but it's also a way to bring up depravity points, even if the temptation dice are not going your way. So good shout, especially because like in the top of turn 1, it's probably very unlikely you'll be offering many dice until at least kind of turn 2. You might get a couple in turn 1, but again, depends on what you're fighting. We've referred a little bit to like the Slaves to Darkness, and you've got the opportunity. By the way, is there anything else you want to add to euphoric killers or temptation dice before we go to the Legions of Chaos?
No, it's looking really good. Our allies unfortunately cannot benefit from this. This only has to affect a Hedonite of Slaanesh unit. So even if you try bringing Be'lakor to try and do it, he will not be able to receive this. It has to be a Hedonite of Slaanesh unit. Mark of Slaanesh in our allies would not be able to benefit from this.
No, which leads us to the Legions of Chaos. So you can bring in 2 in every 4 units in your army can be from Slaves to Darkness, so long as they have the Mark of Chaos keyword. And then 1 in every 4 can be Beasts of Chaos, as long as they're not already Tzeentch or Slaanesh marked. So you could bring in a Cygor, you could bring a Gorgon, a Bulgor, you could bring in a bunch of things from Beast, you could bring in Chaos Warriors, Varangard, lots of things, but you couldn't coalition Be'lakor, for example, or you couldn't coalition the Cultists because they don't have the Mark of Chaos keyword. They're undivided or they're just unmarked. So I guess when you look at these rules, are you going to fill your army up with 2 in every 4, 1 in every 4? Are you finding particular units that you like more than others? And even if you weren't going to take them, like, what's some considerations that I should have for the Legions of Chaos?
So it'll definitely fit into the type of strategy you want your list to achieve. If you really want to lean deep into the control, Cygors, Cockatrices, Be'lakor from these faction abilities become very fantastic choices to take, just to add in and pile on more to those control abilities. A lot of folks like to run the Vanguard. They're just fantastic war scrolls in of themselves. Some hard-hitting cavalries, Chaos Knights as well. I've been seeing a lot of folks really trying to get their Chaos Chosen into the action, and very speedy in their own book, but in our book are just some very nice elite hard hitters. But they're better in their book, I think. From the Beast of Chaos side, getting some cheap screens. You got your Ungor Raider if you want some extra shots. I think Gwar are an interesting choice for a bit of extra fight last spiciness to include in our lists. Chimeras, the Chaos Gargant as well, or Chaos Giant. I believe he's the one that has the 3-inch range to -1 to save.
Yeah.
-1 to save to anyone nearby. So that's another piece that kind of fits nicely with these other abilities that we have over here. All right, let's force our opponent to take a dice or make your euphoric killers just a tad bit better. But yeah, I think a lot of armies will be leaning into some of these allies and trying to pick a little bit when it comes to the war cry war bands. You've got your unmade just to make sure your opponent doesn't redeploy away from you or rallies to replenish. I think that's going to be a really good piece for a lot of armies going forward. And then I believe you have your Untamed Beasts to try and really spread out, push any sort of deep striking threats away, try to take an objective really early. I believe the Ravens, the Corvus
Cabal.
Yeah, nice little units of deep strike around the table, take over some terrain P's to score a quick desecrate battle tactic. We just have so many choices. And then from Zinj for a little bit of our spellcasting, if we want to pile in a little bit more into the minus to saves, Changecaster's okay with that 18-inch range. If you want to reliably try to cast some endless spells, you've got your Blue Scribes. And then I don't think I would take any regiments of renown from the Chaos at all. They don't really seem really good for what we want to do. But I really like Be'lakor in our list, and he seems to be doing really well. Even in our old book, was a bit of a critical piece and saw a lot of lists being very successful with it. I don't know if you want to include the Incarnate in allied units.
We don't count. Well, before I quickly respond to you, because I do want to clarify something you've said. While we're on the topic, Incarnate, yay or nay?
Nay in this book.
Why?
Nay. While we may get to the War Scrolls and talk about a certain someone, very big someone that may have eaten an Incarnate in his previous adventures.
Open the Christmas present early. Yeah. Tell me a secret.
Glutos is looking really nice in this book, and unfortunately for the Incarnate, they cost the same amount of points, and I think it is true that Glutos did eat an Incarnate at some point in the last GHB. So I'm very excited for what he's going to bring, but an Incarnate in this army doesn't really play into a lot of the abilities that we have. We have our Euphoric Killers generate depravity, and as a centerpiece model, it's okay. You can still find success with it as just something that stays on the table, but ultimately it's not something that plays very nicely into our abilities. So it's going to be an A for me. I don't plan on running it. Mine's just back on the shelf now.
You obviously could. It's just that it doesn't synergize with any of your abilities. Yeah. It's not going to generate you, your depravity points, and it's not going to help you in any fashion. And it is 1/4 of your list if it's 2K list. So, do you get better investment internally? I'd probably say the answer is yes. The thing that I want to clarify before we move on is just some people might be confused. There is coalition and there is ally. So some of the things that Edgar has mentioned is an ally. So something like Be'lakor or the Cultists would be an ally because they don't have the Mark of Chaos. So they wouldn't come in as a coalition, but they are allies. And unlike Khorne, which I don't understand this at all, you can ally in Slaves to Darkness as long as they don't have the Mark of Chaos. So you could bring in your Cultists, you could bring in Be'lakor, you could bring in something from Slaves that didn't have the Mark. It's just an ally within your ally pool restriction. While I could use a unit of 6 Varangard and use it as a coalition if I mark it as Slaanesh. It's a little bit confusing, I know some people, but when you sit down and work it all out, you've got more flexibility than Khorne. Haha, sucked in.
Yep. I feel bad for the Khorne players. Hopefully that gets fixed.
It has to get fixed. Yeah. It has to get fixed. I don't understand why it looks like that. So we talked a lot about depravity, and we actually haven't talked a lot about depravity. We talked about generation and why depravity is important and how you do it. But what do you actually get for it? And there are 2 things you can possibly do. One, you get the Revel in Depravity. So as you accumulate points, you unlock 3 different benefits. So at 12, 24, and 36, there's a bunch of benefits. You either at 12 subtract 1 from hit rolls when you target Hedonites of Slaanesh. At 24, you generate mortal wounds on a roll of a 6 in melee, in addition to any other damage you would normally do. And then at 36, you would get a 5-up ward for everyone who is Hedonites of Slaanesh keyword. In addition to all of that, you have the ability to summon Demons of Slaanesh, and it ranges from Keepers of Secrets all the way down to Demonettes of 10 and some minor heroes and chariots. There's a whole list there that you can check out for yourself. But what I wanted to ask you is, when you think about this accumulation, you've talked about using cavalry to generate them early. We've used Euphoric Killers to generate some in combat. are you someone who is generating these to summon demons as quick as possible? Are you someone who just wants to get to 36 on the Revel of Depravity as soon as possible? Is there a combination? Like, how do you look at this, and what's the goals and the considerations for me as someone who's now managing the Depravity?
So I believe now that with these very nice abilities compared to what we had before, reaching the 24 depravity threshold is what really unlocks our cannon and our very fantastic abilities to prolong combats and be very killy with our units. Becomes a very good incentive for anyone trying to rack up these depravity points to hand out those temptation dice and to use your forward killers efficiently to race through these depravity abilities and make the most of them in our army. So a lot is going to have to go into the consideration for your starting lineup and your starting list, trying to figure out which units will be trying to get the depravity early in round 2, round 3, based on your matchups, of course, but ultimately trying to figure out the plan as to like how you want to position your units when you have your -1 to hit now up and ready, how aggressive you want to pick your targets apart once you're up to 24, and then once the party really gets going and you have the 5-up ward up and you are now playing a Nurgle army essentially with very resilient saves and ward saves and being able to hit pretty hard, the army just becomes tough as nails. So we don't really want to have summoning as the main goal when we have these fantastic abilities, but it's really nice to have in the pocket, especially with the choices we have here. And we can only summon demons. The mortals will normally always be in the starting list, but only demons can ever be called upon to join our party once it really gets going. So ultimately, one little note I kind of have about these abilities is they don't really seem very Slaanesh-y, but I'll take them as really strong abilities that we start getting as we start keeping the party going, racking up these depravity points, making sure our opponents having a great time with temptations, and that the whole flavor of Slaanesh just outpours out of the list that we build and bring to the table. So with the -1 to hit, just having our opponents hit a little bit like a wet noodle just becomes, very, very fun and resilient for our army.
Or making them spend a command point to get to override that. And I think that's as a Gits player with plenty of minuses to hit, that's the thing, right? Like, you are either forcing them to spend a command point to be at their baseline profile, or you're stopping them from going from a 4 to a 3. Or, or you're dragging, if they don't spend that resource, they go from a 4 to a 5. Or obviously, the numbers are the numbers, but, it makes some interesting resource management decisions. And you can, it's kind of annoying, especially as the army gets it, right? So they can only spend all that attack in one area in one combat phase.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then some units that hit on 4s, they're really gonna have a rough day. There's just some units out there that unfortunately have this. Even in our best opponent's book, Khorne, a lot of their units still hit on 4s. So it's like, this is not gonna be very, very good for you. And then where I like the -1 to hit as well is those fight on death abilities. Now we have this extra added protection where we don't feel as bad, getting stuck in those combats. The -1 to hit really helps us out with targeting those units or getting into them. Fighting the hero phase as well. This is just always going to be up on all of our Hedonites of Slaanesh units. So we just kind of duck a little bit out of the way, or maybe our units are dancing so much in the field that our opponent's just missing, which I like this.
Like that one to me is a nice one, but I feel like the 24 is like where I'm striving for. The sooner I can get to the 24, the better. And at least the way I was reading it was that I never want to dip under 24. I feel like if I'm going to summon, it's when I hit like the 30 mark, as long as, again, I don't drop from even more than 30. Like, I never want to drop under 24 because I want to trigger those mortals, especially by the time I get to 24, I'm probably in the thick of the battle, and I want those mortal wounds in addition to my regular attacks. And it works well with euphoric killers because that triggers a mortal wound, off mortal wounds and regular wounds. And obviously it just plays so well to, as you mentioned, you're a little bit of a glass cannon. You don't take the hit as well as other armies do. So that to me is like where I'm striving for. Agree or disagree with that?
I really want to agree. And as a bit of a clarification, some folks are looking for exploding sixes, and I think this ability, completely replacing that is much better and adds a little bit of accuracy to our hits, especially if later, we're not trying to dip on the 24, but you bring on a unit of demonettes through summon Slaaneshi demons. That is now 21 attacks that can trigger a couple of sixes and really penetrate deep and really get into the good damage that we want to get into. And this really stacks well with the Euphoric Killer's ability. With the mortal wounds that also count towards giving us some depravity when those wounds are allocated. So this unlocks a certain level of DP generation and lets us overcome some DP check armies out there, especially when we add this to the units that have high volume of attacks. So this will really benefit your Slickbait Seekers, your Demonettes, your Slangor, even the Epitome might have a good time with this. Anything with high potential attacks. If Sigvald is charging in after getting buffed by that Chaos War Shrine, the opponent's unit's going to have a bit of a hard time.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Like, I would not summon, if I'm around the 24 mark or even like 24 to 30, I would not summon like Demonettes or a hero and then dip to 12. I want us to, unless obviously like I'm going to lose an objective or I'm going to lose, if I don't summon, I'm going to lose my battle tactic. Those kind of things would override the revel in depravity. But again, it's situational. That's how I see this.
Oh, for sure. Summoning, it's not a strength anymore, and especially looking at this table, we can't summon 20 or 30 demonettes anymore. We are definitely limited down to the 10. And normally, with trying to keep our buffs from the revel and depravity up at all times, most of the units you may consider summoning would have to come from that 18 depravity point. So we're not dipping below those 24. Doing the mortal wounds on sixes is just so good. But sometimes against a magic heavy matchup, you may need an Inferno and Rapturous to, help with disrupting some of that magic. But that's pretty much it. And she's a Galatian champion. So if you're looking at the Vice Leader, you don't really need her. The Inferno Rapturous would just really sit back and sit on the objective and help with a nice battle tactic or anything that you might need.
And that leads us to, right, this current General's Handbook is about Galatian champions. Again, if you listen to this like 3 months from now and we're in General's Handbook 2023, that's not going to matter. Yep. But just currently where we're at, so we understand the value of the Revel and Depravity. The ward save is nice, but like really 24 is the sweet spot at least. With the summons, if you're going to summon, what are the situations or what are the things that you'd like to summon more than others? Am I going for Keepers of Secrets because I want that extra, combat-y monster hero? Do I want those Demonettes? Do I want those champions, as you mentioned, the Vice Leader or the Infernal Rapturous or a Blade Bringer? Like, what are some good value or good things for you to consider for summoning?
So I really like the Demonettes as like a nice little unit that has a built-in bonus to charge that can just try to look for an 8 on the die when they come on the field and really sneak up on that objective or try to get into a back line. Slaanesh armies really like to see an exposed rear, so those Demonettes will take the advantage of that the most. In this current General's Handbook, our Galatian champion units here, being the Enrapture and the Vice Leader, become excellent picks. In the future, we'll have to see how that plays out. When it comes to the Chariots of Slaanesh for 24, I don't think that's good value. They can't issue commands, I guess, but you'd have to have someone kind of babysitting them, and they could just sit out a little bit. Excellent for blocking movement if you just need something to screen, but that's pretty much it. Demonet's going to handle that. It's too many depravity points going into the Chariot. Seekers, again, decent screens, but at 24, I just wouldn't go for that. The Epitome becomes a very interesting choice, though, with all the utility that she brings. And if it gets to the War Scrolls, it's just an excellent unit. There's no bonuses to charge or anything, so she's going to have to sit out for a round a little bit, but is also a Galatian champion, and in this GHB helps out. The Bladebringer, though, this becomes a very interesting choice with bringing some bonus spellcasting to the list. And if it's an Exalted, which is probably what you're going to do if you ever consider one of these chariots, the Exalted Bladebringer, it's going to really shred into some good armor save units with their Mutilating Blades abilities and brings additional mortal wounds to the list if that's what you're really looking for. I can usually probably use against like a Stormcast matchup, or if you have a Kragnos out there, the Bladebringers are going to be excellent choices for those types of games. And then for Fiends, Fiends tend to do really well into armies that have high wound counts, but looking at the maps and how the damage stacks up with these guys, you're often not going to really be bringing them or summoning them at all. But they're not the worst choice if you're trying to get to a certain type of output similar to what Slick Blades can bring. But
they're just expensive.
30 points is too many. Yeah.
That's why I'm like, ooh, like if it was more towards the Demonette Chariot number, I'm like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But I feel like when I look at this, and maybe it's just because I love my monsters and I love my keepers. Like if I'm around the 30 mark, I'm like, I'll just get 6 more and I'll go get a keeper. Because like you can't compare three Fiends versus a keeper. I'm taking the keeper every day. I get a monstrous rampage, a heroic action. I get probably more attacks, more damage, probably a better euphoric killer. Like it's just upside.
Absolutely. And then in some armies, they really like to keep their terrain faction up. You summon the keeper nearby, that terrain faction may not be there, and that's a miscran strat. So that monster's action is so good for some of the armies that are currently doing really well. But the keeper secrets, especially if you didn't bring one, will let something else fight again in the combat phase, and that just becomes incredible value. No bonuses to charge or anything, so there is a chance that you're fishing for that 9 if you're trying to get it into action right away. But overall, the accessories on the keeper and what it brings, if you're trying to summon it and you really need it, I think it's going to be the best value out of any of these options here if you have the depravity and are doing very well with it. But ultimately, it really comes down to the circumstances in the game. The buffs that we get at 36 are just excellent. But you may find yourself in the game with 72 or more depravity, then the keeper's coming down.
Yeah. It's again, this is all situational, folks. So if you find yourself about to lose an objective, again, battle tactics, grand strategy, whatever it is, and summoning is important. It'll help you score what you need to score, or deny your opponent from doing their thing. You might drop from the 24 mark that I keep talking about a lot, but I think a lot of this is probably tempting you and maybe not the most use of your depravity. Keeper of Secrets, I could see. Maybe my question to you before we move on to the next particular part is, you mentioned this is a great way to bring in a keeper if you don't pay for one. So maybe the 2 questions in this is that a strategy? Is that like a legitimate strategy? Like build up an army and get a free Keeper of Secrets, as well as is 2 Keeper of Secrets too many if I pay for one and then summon another?
I think it might be a little bit too expensive. And for what you can get in a starting list, if your strategy is going to revolve around bringing a keeper onto the party, onto the board, I think it's a bit too much of a cost for a starting list. And just with what the army wants to do, it just really wants to seek out the depravity generation and focus any of these other fantastic units to summon into the circumstance that requires it the most. But on my side, I think it's a very good strategy if you have the extra depravity and have a unit on the table that could still benefit from a fight twice, or from some of the accessories a keeper can bring. I think it's a good idea to build around potentially trying to summon one. They're not terrible. I've seen some feedback and some notes out there about keepers not really getting there, but I think they are in a very good spot. They're not like the last book, but they're not also at the OP broken level of fight last that we used to have before. So the keepers being gorgeous models, everyone wants to bring one out to the table and say, all right, here's my centerpiece that was sitting out here in my tray for a little bit. It's now joining the party. Check out these claws. They might do some efficient damage, but they don't have volume of attacks, but they have that delicate precision, which I think lives up to their name, and they want to precisely hit something. 2 keepers, I think. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The problem with the keepers though is their fight twice ability is now only just once per game. It doesn't matter how many we bring, so you get some diminishing returns on multiples.
Yeah, no, great shout. Let's talk about the sub factions, right? So we talked a little bit about the 3 different sub factions. Interesting that you lost a couple, because what was it? The Ever Chosen book, which was a supplement, expanded it to have an extra couple. And this is probably the smallest amount of sub factions that any book has. Like, all of them seem to have like 6, 5, or 8, like a large amount. So you've only got 3 options, and these are obviously your invaders, your god seekers, and your pretenders. So when you look at the 3, and we'll get through all 3 of them in a minute, do you think all 3 of them are good? Do you think 2 are better than others? Like, are they unique play styles? Like, what's your general overview of the 3 sub factions?
So I believe that there's 2 sub factions here that will see more play than the third, but they all generally tend to lean into a type of gameplay style.
Yes.
Myself, I'm really leaning into God Seekers a little bit, but it is sad to see us lose the other 3 that the Ever Chosen book brought us, and unfortunately, we no longer have the Lurid Haze, the Scarlet Cavalcade, or the Faultless Blades anymore. So those, unfortunately, are now a thing of the past. So we will have to play out of these. And I think you're correct about these being the least amount of sub factions available in any books. But I think it's the first time that the designers really brought together mini army builds with the spell lores being tied to the sub faction. So I like this approach. I think it's really interesting and really allows us to select the sub faction that plays best into our playstyle. And we're able to build some fantastic heroes with all of this awesome equipment and build some very interesting strategies. But as we dive into it, I'm really excited to kind of see what kind of builds come out of this. Folks are still playtesting, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and sure, like, this is like again, remind everyone, this is like 2 weeks after the book's been out, so there'll be more play testing, more clarification. We already know, for example, the Pretenders has had a change in the strength of godhood, for example. So things may change in the future. We get it. But like, from your initial observation, when I look at an invaders list, what's the archetype? What's the thing that it wants to do? And what's maybe some of the considerations? And then we'll get into like your favorite command traits, your artifacts, and your spells. So what's the good archetype, the heroes, the units, how do I think about this faction?
All right. So when it comes to invaders, this sub faction really tends to lean into bringing all sorts of units. First, making all of your heroes generals, so you can unlock all the battle lines and really try to piece together a list that tends to lean very strongly into a sort of alpha strike, or really pushing models up the table with leading to a perfect turn. A lot of the abilities in the command traits and in the artifacts of power tend to add more to your attacks and really make you very aggressive. So this leans very hard into that cannon aspect that our army now has. With the spell or kind of helping out a little bit to mitigate some of the things, but ultimately you are able to build a nice smashy keeper out of this, some nice smashy chariots if you want to, but ultimately mount a very strong alpha push with all of the heroes that are eligible being able to take advantage of these battle traits that are up there. So these heroic actions, escalating havoc. What I'm really looking at here is this hurler of obscenities, which is an awesome way of just having your heroes kind of gang up, as long as we can roll those 2-ups, gang up on a unit and just say, hey, you no longer have a save, since at the moment it is able to stack and overlay on top of each other and apply layers. Sure, you're giving it +1 to hits, but if it has no save, I don't think it's going to survive, and that's a fantastic ability to use on a euphoric killer's target, just to let everything go through. But ultimately, these extra attacks, your best of the best with adding extra attacks, icon, more attacks for a turn. It really tries to lean into picking that turn or putting the pieces together, having the positioning to mount a really good offense and just push your models up the table. I think this one really leans into that aspect the most. but is unfortunately one of these sub factions that may not see the most play because others just bring so much tools to the army.
So give me an example of a good hero. Who's a good general option for an invader's army? So looking at obviously like the figureheads of the Dark Prince, you then have the escalating havoc that allows you to swap out or get an extra command trait. I think it is command trait. Yep. So
Yep.
what's a good example of a general that might fit the invader's theme?
I've really been liking bringing a Keeper of Secrets in this army. Just really building that Smashy Keeper to have that extra attack if it's near a hero with Best of the Best. And then as well as the Icon of Infinite Access to add another attack to it. With it, it just really builds a really Smashy Keeper with the Hurler of Obscenities if you roll that 2 up. So with that, I'm looking at bringing some other eligible heroes that really help out in this ability. And then in addition to that, the other heroes that can help stack with it. For support heroes, something that would kind of be a little bit eligible to stack up this Hurler of Obscenities trait. Maybe a Lord of Pain if you're having some mortals chill around too. The Contorted Epitome as well with just a lot of attacks. And I would also probably consider this for a chariot if you're looking at it too. An Exalted Chariot with Bladebringer becomes a really good piece to just really move up the board. What I kind of find fun with this Invaders is bringing a Hellflare Bladebringer, an Exalted for Bladebringer, and a Seeker for Bladebringer. Now you have all the chariots. So an oops, all chariots could actually work in Invaders. And then just spam command abilities is just how they work. But I really like the Keeper of Secrets for this one.
Yeah, I do love the idea. Like I looked at the chariots and I'm like, oh, I'd love to run a chariot army. But if you were like, there's obviously so many things you trade away if you do, but if you want to, this is like a good place to do it. Rapid fire, what's your favorite command trait of the 3 and why?
Base, I would always start off with Best of the Best so that your hero that's starting on the table has that extra attack when it's near another allied hero or an enemy hero because it just wants a hero nearby. But then this would allow Escalating Havoc to function as you need to pick one that's different from the one you have. Ultimately, the best command trait in this sub-faction is going to be the Hurler of Obscenities to just pick and choose. Hey, you just have -1 to save. The hit is kind of negligible, but that is the one you really want to have in the bank since the hero that is using this heroic action will get to pick it and then allow another hero to copy it if they roll that 2 up. So you definitely want to start off with one of the other 2 just so you have the Hurler of Obscenities in the bank. And since it just goes off in the start of the combat phase, it's nice to always just use your turn if you're ready for it, or just to force some tough decisions on your opponent if it's on their turn. And just try to copy. It's like, hey, if you come over here where my 2 or 3 heroes are, you have a chance of having a really bad time. There's just so many options here that gets into the mind of your opponent. It's like, yeah, do you want to keep your main piece? Do you want Kragnos to be saving on 6s? You know, all that good stuff. Oh, yikes.
What about your artifact choice? What's your favorite?
Icon of Infinite Access. And this unlocks some play that we did not have in any of our previous books of adding extra attacks to our units. A Keeper potentially having 4 attacks because of Best of the Best with the claws. You know, we're getting up there on some 5 damage weapons, especially with Delicate Precision and doing some mortals. It's just delicious. So I really like this icon. Rodimus rolls a miss, unfortunately. That's something we never want to consider at all. But the Beguiling Gem is an interesting one, but I just don't know what we really want to hope for when it comes to bravery shenanigans. You're usually just going to take Icon. If you want a second artifact, just go with the Arcane Tome. But Icon is fantastic. And then throw it in the Fane for a +1 to wound buff.
Yeah. It's always a funny one playing with the bravery because half the armies in the game are like bravery 10. So obviously you can do it for fun, but if you're going to a tournament, it's always a risk of what happens if I play against demons or undead or any of the many factions out there with super high bravery. Like you're going to need to invest a lot more than just the Beguiling Gem, but you're right. Like it's got some play, but I think the Icon of Infinite Excess And as you mentioned, having an extra artifact to chuck into the Fane to get the extra boosts is always a good idea, and maybe why you don't want to be battle reg. You want to have an extra artifact just to throw away into the Fane.
Absolutely.
And spell lore, do you like all three? What's your favorite of the spells? Like, how do you see all three of those? Because it's interesting, because unlike many other books, normally you have a table or a couple of tables. For you, your spells are tied to your subfaction. So you can't use Lash of Slaanesh if you are in Pretenders. It's only when you're Invaders, which I thought was an interesting little play here in the book. But talking about the spells, do you like all three? Or does one stand out better than others?
One does stand out a little bit better than others, but my comment about the Invader spell lore is that it unfortunately doesn't reach the same power level as some of the other ones, and why this subfaction might see a little bit less play. But Lash of Slaanesh is really nice for those armies that want to kind of bring up a lot of attacks. You really get a chance to really diminish their output and just kind of make them really hit like wet noodles, and it's not going to do much with all the other debuffs we have available to us. Pavane comes in as a very close second, but ultimately, even for high moves, just cutting that by about a third for the rest of the game is nice, but it's just not doing it for me. And then Hysterical Frenzy then really tries to get into those bravery shenanigans a little bit again. So I'm not really liking that. You might get 2 mortal wounds on average on something with like 6 bravery. So like, I don't really like that. Lash of Slaanesh is probably the one that I would bring on 1 or 2 wizards, just because having it around the battlefield is kind of nice for our protection and just reducing someone's output significantly. But this spell lore just isn't to the same kind of power level that we might see in other subfactions. My recommendation is just look at the Lash and then maybe elsewhere for other spells.
Like Flaming Weapon, Mystic Shield, Arcane Bolt, just endless spells. Yeah, I would agree with you. Like, I wasn't that... I mean, Pavane is all right, but it wouldn't be my first spell. It'd definitely be my second spell somewhere, because being able to reduce the movement of... The other problem is, like, it's range 12. So, like, reducing its movement when you're already within 12 is not that bad. But if it had like range 18 or 24 and you could slow its advance, now we're cooking with gas.
Absolutely. It kind of combos with what is it, Gnashing Jaws, if you want to try and get a little more mortal wounds in there, other little abilities, but ultimately you're slowing something down. It's kind of good. It's the rest of the game, but you can't affect that unit again. So that's just the one-off with that spell.
And sure, you could use Umbral Spell Portal if you wanted to, but I just don't think it's a tool that I want to continue investing in. It's nice, but maybe not that nice. But we talked about Invaders. Let's talk Pretenders. Same deal. So you got a couple of battle traits, which is interesting. Go back to like a high-level view. What's the archetype or the style, or what is the Pretenders wanting to do that may be a little bit different even to what we've seen already? Like, how does this one play out?
So Pretenders is a subfaction that I find to be the most flexible, the one that wants to try and do everything, and with the tools that it has, can just about do anything it wants to. The Heir to the Throne ability of receiving all these command points. I'm going into round 2, or my opponent is going into round 2, seeing me with 7 command points that can be spent into anything. This just allows the army to be really annoying and have access to everything in the core rulebook and the DHB just for no reason. So it's really good for being flexible and being able to react very well to many things. The Warlord Supreme ability here, with being able to copy a command multiple times from the general, makes it very excellent for using your runs, your forward to victories, using your redeploys 3 times in a round, all out attack, all out defense in the combat, and inspiring presence on our already kind of low bravery units. The one weakness that I would see with Pretenders is that it really depends on its general, since only the general is able to benefit from this. So something to keep in mind is where the general is, what threats could come to it, or if it's a bit exposed, to really try and cover that as you try positioning it, because losing that piece really cuts down on the value of this subfaction. But this army with that general, already having 18-inch range just really covers a lot of the board. And you may want to really put that on something with a large base. I've seen some lists that forego the command trait entirely and put it on Gluto, since he may be a little bit rough to remove, but has a huge base and a huge profile on the board, and just issues commands to anyone around him. On a Keeper Secrets, again with the accessories, makes it really tanky and a very good option for a hero in this list. And then another one that might also benefit as being your general might be the Contorted Epitome, since it can't easily be sniped off with magic, but will be very mobile around the battlefield and make great use of Strength of Godhood with its 9 attacks.
Yeah, I like it. And I love the fact that you've talked about Glutos, for example, who wouldn't get a command trait, but you're trading up and still being able to leverage Warlord Supreme and Heir to the Throne. And that's enough of a benefit that you could pick Sinessa, Dexessa, one of the unique characters, Shellaxi, if you wanted that. Because often you wouldn't want to trade your command trait. You wouldn't want to trade it off. But that is a good, being able to have so many extra command points, not having to worry if you go first or second. And there's a couple of books, and maybe we'll see this play out more often, where we are seeing the command point mechanic being played around, whether it's stealing your opponent's command points, forcing you to spend 2 command points where you'd normally only have to spend 1. So having this abundance of command points allows you, and then obviously being able to issue it 3 times through Warlord Supreme, really allows you to do what you want to do and not have to worry about, do I use a command point here or here? You can have them all.
Oh yeah, I mean, just being very flexible, very reactionary. Your opponent thinks that, okay, if I move closer to this little group that you might have on the side of the table, seeing all 3 of them redeploy away just is very disheartening. And you just want to make sure you put these abilities and you pick a warlord that you can keep safe for a little bit, because that's just, from a competitive standpoint, a really good ability to always be threatening on the table. And just finishing the round with extra command points that you just couldn't use. You just didn't have enough commands. Just makes it really nice.
I can appreciate this, because as a Gits player in the old book, I would end a game with like plus 15 command points spare. Obviously, it used to be able to accumulate over the battle. So I'd have too many command points and not enough commands to issue. So I can appreciate having the luxury of spending so many. Same structure, rapid. Like, what's your favorite command trait? Who does it go on to? Why, of the 3?
All right, so absolutely. I think for me, it's really split between the Keeper Secrets and the Contorted Epitome, just in the way that I've been playing with this subfaction when using the Strength of Godhood. I've had my Contorted Epitome with a Flaming Weapon up and the Strength of Godhood ability, which does not stack anymore thanks to this errata here.
So yeah, I'll bring that up really quickly because the text there, so it has been errated. This was quickly errated, like the Stormcast Dragons not being able to move. So you can see here, it's now once per turn if the general issues a command to a different friendly Hedonites of Slaanesh unit. Until the end of that turn, improve the rend characteristic of this general's melee weapon by 1 and add 1 to the damage characteristic for the general's melee weapon. So it has changed a little bit since what's on the text there.
Absolutely. Just being able to benefit from it once is already pretty good. The extra rend and the damage when you issue it to a different Slaanesh unit just makes these units a little bit more killy and a little bit more reliable with the damage that they can output. But on a Contorted Epitome, having 9 attacks with 1 profile and 2 more with the second, are you're really able to stack up some damage and run it into a unit that you can deal with. And also battle tactic, taking another GC with a GC, I think makes it a viable target. So I think it's very valuable in this GHP for that purpose. But I've had a Contorted Epitome go into a Lord of Change and deal 19 damage to it. So it's been really nice as a little aspect with our very mobile heroes to send out there. So Strength of Godhood really does it for me if you're playing the non-unique hero. And on a Keeper Secrets, 3 damage sword attacks, 6 damage claws is really tasty. And the strength of the Keeper when purchasing it in your list to start off on the board is going to be kitting it out with some of these items. When it comes to the artifacts of power, we got some very tasty items here. really looking at this Crown of Dark Secrets.
Yeah.
So at the start of your first hero phase, picking the one unit on the battlefield that if the bearer is near them will have their attacks only be 1. And I believe the way this works is that after they are within the aura and have their attacks reduced down to 1, they can still add to their attacks. But any bonuses that they had before they were moved into this aura range just makes it 1 at that point. But
as
really good.
As a Gargant player,
Yeah.
I am dread this. I dread this because my Gatebreaker, who I just has like, just it's high value attacks but low amount. If you bring that down to a 1 attack, and I could smash you in the face, and I fluff that, and I've got to spend a Triumph, I've got to do all that attack, I'll do everything possible. And unfortunately, Gargants are mostly a melee focused army, so I have to go into within 6 inches to handle this. I really dread this Crown of Dark Secrets. So, I mean, obviously, if I have lots and lots and lots of attacks, I couldn't care. Lots of profiles, I'm not going to care. But it's, as a Gargant player, I'm like, I freak out about that one.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit interesting too, especially running this into Archaon. Now you can't slay your kings, your keeper.
Yeah. That Terror guys I was talking about with like the Grizzle Gore, like cool. You got 4 attacks. You normally, sometimes you're lucky to trigger 2 6s. You got 1 shot.
Yep. Then you can layer on a little bit of those coalition allies, Beast of Chaos Cockatrices, and now they're only hitting on 6s if you stare at them. There's just a lot of nice little control-y aspects that we can add to Pretenders.
Even the fact you get -1 to hit with your 12 plot points of Revel in Depravity. Like all of a sudden, you're now within 6 inches, already -1 to hit, and now you're reduced to 1 attack or 1 attack per profile. Like I'm going to spend a resource just to get onto a base profile, and I've only got 1 attack. It's like,
yep, your opponent's going to probably try and keep their unit away from whatever this, whatever the unit on your army is holding this artifact. But now you're playing a little bit of cat and mouse, chasing each other around the battlefield and really trying to hunt them down. So a little bit of additional positioning and mind tricks that are like, where is this unit? Where is the crown? And just going around. But once again, just be mindful of where your unit is, because often it may just be the general that has this, and your general is way too valuable in Pretenders.
There's a lot of good uses of this. Like, you think about, Kragnos, Marathi, Kragnos, Marathi, Archaon, Scarbrand. Like, there's so many good things that you just want to be able to shut down. You obviously
it does not even have to be a hero.
No. I'm just saying, but those alone, like if you think about what Kragnos can do, that's 700 points of pure pain that you've turned into, especially if you charge Kragnos, so he doesn't get the mortal wounds on the charge. Like that does just neuter your opponent. That's 1/3 of their army.
Yep, it's insane value, and there may be some changes to this artifact potentially. I've been seeing some talks about it, but I think right now it's just really good for the value it brings on just potentially shutting down that opponent's piece. But on that point, though, it does not have to affect the hero. If your opponent is really putting all their eggs in the basket of a really killy unit, 15 Chosen, 15 Knights, Empty Throne Varangard, your 36 Squig Herd, all that good stuff, just kind of taking them down to 1 attack is a little punishing, and you want your hero just to get right in there and try to neuter that threat.
What about the spell lore? Yeah, what's your favorite spells of the spell lore?
All right, so this one has some really good combination pieces. I think the Spellers is up there, really competing with the other subfaction, but Phantasmagoria is going to be the best pick. Again, short range, but having that ability to get in with one of our kind of squishy heroes or squishy units once you're already in the thick of it. Just looking at the spell for round 2, round 3. I wouldn't really invest into it with a spell portal, but really get into a unit and be able to retreat from it if that scary unit is trying to get into your units. Being able to just retreat. What's the Skaven ability? Skitter away.
Yeah.
I think the Ungor have it as well. Skinks used to have it. It's just really valuable in our army to leave when they're about to hit you. And it kind of adds a little bit into that crown ability where like, all right, you have their one threat hit with the crown. Now the other threat has Phantasmagoria on it and they can't really hit anything. Makes it really nice. And with the new hero the Slaanesh received, the Lord of Hubris, I think it's worth talking about the little combination that has been hopping around there with...
We do have the War Scroll coming up, but talk about it now while we're here.
Yeah, well, just the one ability that he does bring with the You First, I Insist, allowing a unit to strike first, but only target him. If that unit is effective with Phantasmagoria, this Lord of Hubris walks up, presents himself as a very interesting target, and forces all their attacks to go onto him, and then just leaves without any target now being available to that unit. Now they just kind of sit there, and they have no option to take the challenge. They have to take it as per that War Scroll ability. But we can get into more of what he does.
Until your next hero phase, each time that unit is picked to fight, you cast it on the enemy. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you cast it on the enemy, and then until your next hero phase, when they go to fight, you yeet out.
Yep. Just leave. It's like, no, I'm not interested in this right now.
I like it. I would have picked Born from Damnation as my first spell, just because what we talked about earlier with Depravity and the Temptation dice. I find it's a good fail back that I can at least get. I know, like I'm playing maths here, but I'm getting approximately 3 on average from Born from Depravity, Born from Damnation, and then from extra things I can kind of creep up, and it'll obviously give me summoning pieces, or it'll help me get up to the next tier of the Rebels. Just because I'm finding at least the discussion as more and more opponents are learning about the Temptation dice, I do wonder how many you will actually have in your pool throughout the game, and how impactful it is to not have Depravity through the game. So I would personally be trying to find other ways, like the Keeper has ways to get extra Depravity. One of the Endless Spells has extra ways of Depravity. Maybe it's a fail safe for me.
You make a really good point with that, and unlike the last sub-faction that had like a really one decent spell, this one I would really want to look at Born of Damnation as the second spell to really try to fit into the list from the lore. Casting Value of 6 is, a little bit higher than Phantasmagoria, but having that little bit of degeneration from a hero just sitting kind of in the back, out of range, generating should be at least 3 per round on average, is really good for potentially pushing up to that next tier, or on its own getting you to a tier if you have not had the luck at all to generate any Depravity. But I do like it as the second spell. When it comes to Soul Slice shards, unfortunately though, rolling dice and then roll more dice, just becomes very risky, and into some matchups just is not going to work out. Is very nice if it does go off, but this is just one of those very situational spells that is not going to see much play from this spell lore.
It's not a bad spell. Like when it depends on where the meta's at, right? Because you've got Lumineth, you've got Gargants, you've got Beast Claw Raiders, you've got like who else is doing well at the moment? Like not Gargants aren't doing well at the moment. But like if you think about like Gits out there at the moment, Beasts of Chaos are out there at the moment. They all have low bravery, so you can go in there. This is still a decent spell, but it probably wouldn't be my first pick. I think you and I both agree Phantasmagoria and Born of Damnation should be in your rotation. If you find yourself with an extra wizard, why not consider Soul Slice Shard? But it wouldn't be my first choice when I'm building my list.
Yeah, absolutely. It's up there as a nice little target. Terror Wings have been doing really well. We have another similar spell like this on one of our War Scrolls that I think is a little more reliable, but this is an option if we are in Pretenders, as you mentioned, having an extra wizard, but you want the rotation with the other 2 spells.
Anything else with Pretenders?
Just really liking the full flexibility and the ability to then bring in any units and have an answer to anything with just using and abusing the commands that we get in this army. So I'm really looking forward to this. It does put some players in a pinch with choosing their battle line, since if you want the Keeper and Epitome to make the most out of String of Godhood, It takes you away from other infantry troop options. But a Lord of Pain is not a bad option as well to have as your general in this at all. Like, it's just going to be really good if you want to bring your elite infantry. I would just be very cautious of using the new Lord of Hubris just because he kind of wants to be up in the thick of it, and it's just too many eggs in one basket as your Warlord Supreme.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, if I was taking the Lord, the Painbringer, not Painbringer, what's his name? Lord of Pain.
Lord of Pain? Okay.
Yeah, like he's a little slow, and I think at the Crown of Dark Secrets, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like that combination. I mean, Keeper, absolutely, you got the speed, the base size to go hunt. That I feel like if you put that on like a slower, small hero like that, you could just avoid it. I feel like I could avoid the Crown of Dark Secrets on a small hero a lot easier.
I'm really referring to the Lord of Pain as being the Warlord Supreme and having the traits, but the artifact can go on the Epitome or something fast to really chase something around the field.
I'm just calling that out. That if you were going to do that, I would probably swap where the artifact goes. I wouldn't put it on the Lord of Pain because But I think we all agree on this one, which is good. And then that doesn't have to be good, but I think we both agree on the thinking behind it. And then the last one is the God Seekers. So again, what's the archetype? How does this one particularly work, and how is it a little bit different than the rest?
So this is one that's really been growing on me. You know, a lot of excellent play. You know, it's not as consistent as the other ones, but just having that extra movement from this Thundering Cavalcade and Maniacal Hunter's abilities has just really grown on me as well. So looking at it from perspective, we're saving command points with Thundering Cavalcade as long as our heroes are around the units, and it's of course would benefit themselves, always just rerolling their charges. And on Sigvald, I think he's really going to love this. It's like, all right, trying to fish for a higher charge. If he's been hit by the Chaos Shrine, he's just rolling his 3d6 for free. Oh, we're going to have a good time. Our Tusk Helm is going to live in this sub-faction. We have other spells when we get to it that give us 3d6. This is magnificent. I think this one is really competing with Pretenders and just the utility of what we're going to get from these abilities to be a fantastic choice. Maniacal Hunters, though, is just something that's going to take a lot of players off guard with moving off or onto objectives, you know, just sneaking up behind the corners. An opponent that may have screened an objective off really well, blocking you off from piling into it during combat in the previous round. If you're able to take that unit out, start of the next round, you just move right onto the objective and it's yours now. What I do like about this Maniacal Hunters, though, is that it happens before players receive their command points. So it is at the start of the battle round, and because it's happening before a hero phase, moving on to the objective lets you take control of it as the checks happen at the beginning of a turn. So I do really like that ability of just making your opponent really come back to a unit if they took that objective.
I want to pause for a second because this is a little technical and a little bit gamey for people who are like, how does this actually work in theory, right? So at the start of the battle round, each player receives a starting command. And before they receive their command points, you can move up to D3 friendly Godseeker units that are more than 3 inches, so basically not in combat. You can move them D6 inches. You roll it separately for each of those units. Yeah. Now, those units must finish more than 3 inches, so you can't move them outside of combat, inside of combat. Can't do that. So I can move basically up to D3 models, D6 inches. Okay, it sounds okay, but when you put it into practice, what does it mean, Edgar? So, like, well, give me some real tangible examples of what you could use this for.
Very first, in shooting versus shooting matchups, or where your opponent is bringing some threats and you may not know if you're going to get priority. You can really measure out your units and all your good stuff, find out what their threat ranges are, and if you're going to get priority in the turn, move closer to where your units will have the most impact, screen a little bit better. If you feel like you may have baited your opponent into an area, it's like, hey, you thought you took the first round to potentially take advantage of this opening, but now this free redeploy at the start of the round is just going to let me move and kind of cover that up, and just kind of reposition, since Age of Sigmar really lives on that movement and positioning aspect. This sub faction really just gives you that extra bit of movement. Of course, not into combat or anything like crazy like Khorne, but just keeping those thoughts in your opponent's head is like, all right, I will need to deal with some movement here. It could just be an inch, it's a bit of a gamble, or it could be a massive 6 that just rotates into changing the aspect of the game and just potentially making your opponent waste a turn with this new unit that just kind of moved into place. So this just require a lot of overhead, or I want to say top perspective thinking and looking at the board, knowing where this move, because it could just be one unit or it could just be 3, really getting an impact. But what I also like about this is if you have the ability to decide turn priority to move your slower units up a little bit more, your slower Painbringers, Sigvald with his 6-inch, could benefit a lot from moving up a little bit closer. Slangor as well, like cavalry, anything would really benefit from getting into a better position to make a better strike, hit somewhere better where a euphoric killer's ability might actually get them close to a unit that you want to get to. So I really like this for the offensive capabilities in that manner, or the defensive of just maybe moving away from a threat range.
So, like, there's so much that I think about with this rule. I could move a unit onto cover for extra save. I could move a hero onto mystical or arcane terrain to get the 6-up ward or the +1 to casting. I could move onto an objective. I could move off an objective. I could move in line of sight blocking or get towards a garrison. I could move closer to the enemy to make a charge easier, or I could move backwards to avoid them, and that would obviously come into shooting. I could move something into unbind range. I could get them out of casting range. Like, there's so much interplay here that you could possibly do. You could put more models onto an objective to contest. I think is it the not the Mirmadish, the Painbringers. Is one of them, like, they count more on objective in enemy territory, I think it is. Like,
I don't think we have that. I think it's the +1 to saves in enemy territory you're thinking of on the Painbringers.
Yeah, I remember there was something. But, like, long story short, like, there's so many little interplays that you could use this for. You could make you do that plus a redeploy, like, later on, or you get them in range of a command ability. Like, if you're out of range to do a rally from your general or whatever, like, now you are. Like, there's just so many things you can do, which basically, like, it's not just movement, it's what the movement can do for you.
Absolutely. And your opponent may be thinking, hey, I have unbind range, or my 18-inch range spell can hit this target as deployment is happening. Not so much. Oh, we're out of there. So a lot of potential opportunities open up with this type of ability, and moving into these type of abilities, especially if maybe a terrain arcane ability is just outside of your deployment zone or where you want it to deploy, and just move right closer to it, get the benefit.
Hell, you could move on to damn terrain, and now you can take +1 to hit by taking D3 mortal wounds. Like, cool, there's another way. Like, there's so many things you could possibly do. Anyway, there's my TED talk. Just there's a couple of ideas on how you could use Manacle Hunters. What are the command traits, artifact, and spells that you would choose, or at least your priority ones?
So this is the sub-faction that really spoils us for choice, and I think, unlike the other sub-factions, brings a lot to the table with what kind of list you want to build for the command traits that are offered here. So once again, just kind of looking at the Speed Chaser real quick, for that Thundering Cavalcade, fishing for a bigger charge to make use of those 4-ups based on what you roll to do some mortal wounds on whatever that general charge is going to be fantastic. I don't think this combines with the Tuscom because it's just one that goes off. So just to put that clarification out there.
But can I just say one thing about Thundering Cavalcade that we didn't talk about?
Okay.
When you try to just for anyone who may not have connected this dot, when you use a command point to re-roll a charge, you can't do it on anyone else. Like, it's one unit in that phase. You now can do it on everyone. So now even any charge, and obviously wholly within 12 inches of Godseeker Hero,
Yep.
I get that. But it means you can re-roll so many of your charges, get more of them into combat, trigger off those mortal wounds on 6s when you're on 24 Revel in Depravity, let alone any of the other abilities we've spoken about. Some good stuff in there.
Yeah, that's more command point save. We're not generating crazy amounts like Pretenders here, so this is saving us for that all-out defense, all-out attack, or Inspiring Presence we might need later in the turn.
Or some of those risky charges, like the ones that are like 9 out, 12 out, the ones that you summon and you're now outside of 9. You've now got a better chance to get them in combat because you're getting more opportunities to roll.
Absolutely. And once again, like at the beginning, Sigvald really loves this and is going to want to fish for a higher charge just for free. So I was like, why not? But yes, it's a very hard choice for me here on what to pick. And when it comes to the command traits, we are able to build a really good Keeper of Secrets out of this one with the Hunter Supreme, with having that additional attack on the charge, making it so that a unit can't pile into the Keeper, or can't pile in at all. If we want to charge it with 2 units, kind of tag them on edges and then just prevent as much fallback on ourselves. But a really good Keeper of Secrets can be built in this Godseekers faction. An idea that has been tossing around my mind for anyone trying to run Demonettes into the fray on a Vice Leader is actually kind of interesting. With having that strike first and then letting Demonettes fight in as well with that similar rules as to the Chaos Lord, without needing the bodyguard battalion or the Storm bodyguard. It just becomes an interesting choice, but we have options, getting Sigvald in to strike first, getting a Keeper in to strike first if you decide to go that route, and then letting Sigvald fight again. So it's really awesome with the opportunities and the abilities we have to make out of these command traits here. A nice smashy Keeper, just one still, I think, but it's just beautiful with Into the Fray and Hunter Supreme. We're spoiled for choice here.
Sigvald Sigvald's a named character, so you can't give him a command trait for obvious reasons.
Correct. So Sigvald would just get the strike first from charging, but now if you have Sigvald in here benefiting from the movement, he is just going to move in with the Keeper. Keeper will strike first. Sigvald will strike first. Keeper will then let Sigvald fight again, and he activates as your first normal activation, and then fights again.
I just wanted to make the connection in case anyone thought about trying to add Into the Fray onto Sigvald and then trying to work out why that was an error or illegal. No, we're just calling out a War Scroll ability. Anyway, Artifacts of Power. I think I don't know. For me, Cameo of the Dark Prince is the one that I like, but I always hate once per battle abilities. It kind of always grinds my gears.
Well, being able to issue free commands on a turn you think you might need it, but ultimately these strategies can really lean into the other 2 artifacts. The nice thing about Cameo, and I used to use it a lot in the old Godseekers just for a command point and to throw it into the Fane, becomes a nice little use for this one use artifact.
I imagine though the third one is the one that you're going to like when you add that to the Keeper with Hunter. Like, surely it's Girdle, right? It's Girdle. Yeah.
I'm surprised you on this one, but I want to build onto what you just mentioned there. For anyone wanting to build a good Keeper, your Hunter Supreme or Into the Fray Keeper, Girdle is going to be the way to go on that Keeper, letting it fly, pile in 6 for anyone that missed that from our old books. It's something that makes the Keeper a little spicy and potentially avoid a nasty Unleash Hell and get into some Sentinels after. What I like about this is I believe you can just run and still just be eligible to fight like zombies, right?
Bearer can fly. In addition, the bearer is eligible to fight. You can run. So it's like zombies and Sisters of Slaughter. The other one, just to call out in case we don't get to it, is you can avoid monstrous rampages. So you get yourself outside of, like, let's say you put yourself in 4. Can't monstrous rampage you, then you pile in and then you slap them good. So it's another way to leverage that, because and for anyone who doesn't know how this all works, you can still run and you're not charging, right? So, there's no run and charge ability in this particular area, but you are eligible to pile in if you're within 6 inches. So if you use a command point to go 6, or if you make the normal run roll, as long as you end that move within 6 inches, you will be eligible to pile in when you are through the activation process in combat. So that's how that works if you are unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I've been seeing and that I kind of wanted to bring up and potentially surprise you with is this Threnody voice box, which even though it's a once per battle, I really do like this. And I wasn't using it on a Keeper Seekers, just other heroes that are playing a little cagey. You're bringing your Lord of Pain or something a hero that wants to be up in the front. You're eventually going to get charged and you're going to go into melee with some units. Got a chance to explore this. My opponent brought Nihon, and so I was like, this is the artifact that I wanted to try out today, and it actually was pretty great. On the charge, Blade Guys now being near the unit with this artifact, or unfortunately now not getting as much output, or big blocks of infantry, even though it's once per game, it's very critical and adds a good swing to the game. That's then letting my Painbringers, Twin Souls, anything have staying power and reduce attacks in another method. I did really like the Threnody voice box. It's just something my opponent had to keep in mind when trying to charge into my castle or into my units that are just kind of hunkered in an objective. I do lean a lot into the girdle when it comes to the Keeper build, but the Threnody voice box surprised me a lot, and I really like this. Is just another thought your opponent has to keep, kind of like a pseudo crown. Like, it doesn't get to that point, but as a once per game thing, it's just it can swing the tide of the entire game on a unit or multiple units because it affects everything within that range for that whole turn. Yeah.
But it's only 6. I think that's my thing with the voice box.
Mm-hmm.
It's only 6-inch range. Obviously, if you put it on a bigger base model, you get more value from it. For me,
Sure.
Girdle is the one that I would go, then voice box. Cameo is nice, but when you look at some of the other things, that you're getting more command points through other areas anyway. Like, you might not need the extra command, especially a once per game. Hell, I forget about the Warlord command like 90% of the time. So, like I don't even think I need the cameo, but. I'll take it. I'll take the voice box. I can see maybe for me. Yeah, okay, I'll give it to you.
Very good.
It's all right, but it's just the 6 inches for me. It's just like,
well, usually when you're hunkering on an objective, that's where I've seen it come to play, and it's like, yeah, come try and threaten this objective from me. It's you're gonna hit like a wet noodle. You have your other debuffs, the -1 to hit from Toe of Depravity, and now you're -1 to your attacks on bigger units. It surprised me a lot, and it's something that I would really consider as a second artifact if I was taking something and not building a Keeper.
Second artifact, I agree with you there. Yeah, but my first would probably be the Girdle. Anyway, we're both good artifacts. Like, you pick whatever works for you. Girdle for me, like, I just love 6-inch pile in. It's
and
it allows so many tricks.
The threat to the Girdle, though, is that, of course, the enemy can redeploy away from you. But what if we had a spell to prevent that? Let's look at this spell.
Nice segue.
Yeah.
What's in the scroll?
What about this progeny of damnation we have here? Cast on a 5 and targeting a hero. If they finish that move near the unit that you really want to get to, they can't redeploy away from you. So here's this 20-inch move Keeper. Moving right up to a nice juicy target, doesn't need to be affected by that monster's action, as you mentioned. Very good pointer there. Doesn't risk Unleash Hell or any other those abilities in the charge phase. We're just going to move right in and do some damage. The only kind of counter synergy that comes from this combo is if it has the Hunter Supreme, it would have needed to have made the charge move, so you're not going to get the bonus attack, but your Keeper is safe and able to get in there with all of its standard melee profiles and really get in there.
Who cares about stopping a redeploy when you can do a 3d6 charge with the Pass of the Dark Prince?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, cool. I mean, maybe my redeploys are mostly trash, right? Like redeploy 1 or 2 and it doesn't matter. But like, let's go 3d6, baby. And I can reroll that charge.
So in this case, what I would probably consider here is with that Speed Chaser on another hero and really get those extra mortar wounds and really juice it up. The sad thing about this spell is that it doesn't extend your eligible distance to declare the charge. You still have to be within 12, but can roll that 3d6 to really guarantee your chance of getting in there. and reroll it for free with Thundering Cavalcade.
Yeah. I think that's the sweet combination, right? 3d6 charge, 12 inches. I can re-roll it using the Thunderous Cavalcade. Yeah, and then Slothful Stupors, all right, but like it's a higher casting value. And the other two just sing to me. The other one's like, yeah, if I got a third caster, yeah, maybe.
Casting value 5, casting value 5. The problem with Slothful, of course, is at 7. If you're bringing it on something, probably on the Contorted Epitome, if it's in your list, just to really try and get up to that 7. But can really just take a unit out of the game for a round while this spell is up if it does manage to land, and then just stay a certain amount of distance away so that it never can charge you, can never get into threat range. You just ignore it. Another element of control. Take out, just not allow a Thankful, for example, to get into your block of infantry to use those braziers in, or just have Archaon floating around if this lands. I like the spell, but the other two really fit into the other combinations of being very aggressive, using your keeper or your big hero to really get in there. About pass, though, as well, it only affects the caster, so we are unfortunately not able to give it to someone else. So we can't give Sigvald the 3d6 charge off of this.
No, but that's where the Coalition War Shrine comes in. So now you can get 2. So if you keep a Seeker's a wizard, it casts it for its 3d6 charge, and you get the Shrine for Siggy, and you've now got 2 3d6 charges. And Sigvald's attacks are based off the charge roll. So giddy up.
Yeah, I'm really loving it. Godseekers is what I really try to plan on continuing to play. It's the faction that I played before the most often when we had that +1 to charge from it. But rerolls, I think, for the whole army, as long as they're within the hero range, it's really going to work out. So just make sure you're measuring and make everything's within the range of the hero, and we're going to be good.
That's the one that really sings to me. I think Godseekers is the play style that I would enjoy. Just looking at the different things, not just the command traits, but the battle traits, the artifacts, the spells. That seems to be the one that I would enjoy the most. Speaking of enjoyment, you got the Lord of Hubris, and we already kind of gave you a little bit of insight in regards to the you first, I insist, and then yeet out if you use that little combination. But step back for a second. As a war scroll, what are your thoughts on the Lord of Hubris? Because it's got an okay attack profile, 5 attacks, 3/3s, Ren 1 for 2. Okay, you're not wonderful, but you can slap a little bit. Okay move, basic save at best. When you look at this, you're taking it for the abilities on the scroll, especially if you're going to take the Painbringers or the Twin Souls. But when you look at the Lord of Hubris, do you like it? Will you take it? Is it an auto include? And why do you take it if you do, or why don't you if you don't?
I think the game designers were a little conservative with his War Scroll design. Has a lot of the stats that the same Lord of Pain brings, but slightly worse save. He definitely will want to fit a certain play style, and if you're really leaning into that elite infantry build with the Twin Souls and the Painbringers, is where you'll likely get the most advantage out of this new hero. So with that ability to allow them to fight on death, will add that additional value to them. If they're getting charged, they're really good anvils, but if they need to attack, they have a good amount of attacks. Sure, but what I really like about his only the best will suffice is if you've reached that 24 depravity threshold, just singing into the value of that current threshold of depravity, is that when your units are fighting on death, if they fought already and now they're getting hit back, fighting on death is another chance to do those mortals on 6s, get some more damage in there. I really like it for that ability, but it really leans into bringing those troops. Just because of his move, if you're doing it in Godseekers, I guess it's the better way to do it for bonus moves, but the you first, I insist does require a bit of playing around to set up properly. So if you're getting charged or expecting that for it to happen, your opponent can ignore this or avoid a charge somewhere else because it's only a 1-inch range. So I had some concerns about his ability here, but if we're the ones that are able to set it up, I think it's okay. I just think it's kind of difficult. Having a 5-up save, even though it is a 4-up, if only 5 wounds, is very risky. And if he is not able to get away with a Phantasmagoria combo, he is definitely going to be grind down very easily, in my opinion. So I'd be very conservative with trying to bring this model in, unless you're trying to use that elite infantry and set up the fight on death combos and use him as a good lord. But I think most players are going to want to lean into the buffs that the Lord of Pain brings. So you're already having to invest into both of these heroes in that case, which if you find the space and you have the points, I think is worth it. I think they're both 135 from what I'm seeing here. Lord Painting should be 135 as well.
Yeah, they're around the same price. They're around the same price, if not the same price. Yeah, they're both the same price, 135. Both leader, both single. Yeah, they're literally the same.
Yeah.
Same.
So yeah, it really has to lean into that list idea. So anyone that loves the Remembrance Framebringers, pour their heart and souls into them. The Twin Souls, I think will see benefit from this, but ultimately, the U4 Sciences is a bit difficult to set up and might not really see the play out that I was really hoping for. But I think the profile in melee is fantastic as a hero that can fight in the hero phase if he's in combat and survived. Having the ward save is okay, a little bit of survivability, but I think there's just better choices for the hero slot that he is in.
So what I'm hearing from you is if I was running a Mirmadish or a Twin Souls type of list, you're probably more still lying into the Lord of Pain as opposed to the Lord of Hubris is kind of what I'm hearing. Because I would agree with you, the 1-inch setup is hard, and it's not to say that it's useless, but to get the combinations that you have in your head is going to take a lot of practice. But look, it's 135. It's an interesting trade piece. In the Galatian champion meta, having something with a 4-up ward natively is not a bad thing to have, but I probably wouldn't make it an auto include. It's interesting, but I think you've got a lot of good sub commander options in your disposal.
Yeah, and if a player wanted to really make this kind of work and add some consistency to it, giving it an Arcane Tome, it's already taking an artifact slot, giving it the 3d6 charge spell. All right, now you're trying to set it up a little bit, but now he may, the unit that's trying to get into him, he's not going to have an escape in Godseekers when you're trying to set it up this way. So he will end up losing you those resources. So I just don't think it's feasible to set up.
It's a lot of investment for potentially little return, I think is. But hey, listen, in comment section, if you at this point are like, no, I'm a mad rep for the Lord of Hubris, represent. If that's your homeboy, like, let me know in the comments how it's working for you. I'm not currently seeing the connection because of the amount of resources, as Edgar's mentioned. I think I would agree with you on that one. It's interesting. Maybe better in a other person's army if it was a coalition or if it was an ally. It's self-contained 4-up ward, minor hero, could combine nicely. Maybe not so much in a Hedonites of Slaanesh force.
Maybe. Yeah, I'd like to hear about it. Yeah, if anyone has any ideas on that too. Outside of a Slaanesh army, that'd be that.
Hey, I have no affiliate link. I'm not trying to convince you to go buy one. That's just how I'm looking at it. You've got so many great options. Speaking of options, do you, without going into all the details, do you think you have good grand strategies to choose from? And if you were to pick one from this list, which is the one that you like better, or will be the one you pick?
All right. So this is very awesome.
Or if you like Khorne. If you like Khorne and you don't have any good ones, then just say, no, I'll stick to the General's Handbook.
Oh, no, we absolutely have some really good ones here. Some that just do not require any interaction from your opponent. They cannot stop it, in particular when it comes to Selfish Desire. I really see that one being very popular with especially folks that don't want to bring a summoning pool and just want to really put all the eggs in the basket of the army they're playing. You just start your game off with 3 points. Fantastic. You're not going to summon anything. Beautiful. We're on the right track. Selfish Desire, I think, is a really good pick in this case. And in the case that you do need to summon something and forego the 3 points of the Grand Strat, you have that option. But it's given. It's yours. Starting the leg up with the 3 extra points. A close second that I could see coming in here would be the Glutton for Depravity, having 36 or more unspent depravity points. But an opponent can interact with that, deny you all your temptation dice, and make it a little bit difficult with the euphoric killers to get to. But I think it would be the next one to get to as well. And again, if you're at 36 and need to summon, you then have to decide, okay, do I need the 3 points in the grand strat, or do I just summon immediately? But you don't start with it immediately and have to work a little bit to get it. But I do like this selfish desire and the glutton for depravity ones from this list. Very easy.
Yeah, I agree. Arch Tempter could be all right. Where's that?
You got a tempt unit.
No, it's the same enemy unit. No, that's bad. No.
Yeah, it's hard to set up.
The same. Yeah, the same enemy unit. No.
Coveted Riches also requires a lot of work. I think it's not going to make it. I think we had this one before, but it was never taken.
And the battle tactics, where do we stand? Do you think we got a couple of good ones? Actually, maybe a better question first off is turn 1 is always a difficult battle tactic to score because we don't have those auto include ones that we used to have in the last book. Are there ones that stand out to you early game, and are there ones that stand out to you more than others?
Well, I mean, from the GHB, we're normally looking at Cunning Maneuver and the Desecrate as like very good first turn battle tactics. But from our own list here, I think this is looking beautiful for our options and gives us a lot of opportunities to forego risking those other 2 core battle tactics when we want to probably save them for the end or later when in the thick of things. But ultimately, I think the battle tactics here are a home run. I want to give it an A in the overall rating on what we have here as an opportunity that some of these tactics our opponent can interact with at all. And the one I'm really looking at is Depraved Unity here as another competitor for the very first one. We want to take an objective. Most players will probably have at least one demon unit in the Contorted Epitome that moves 12 to move on to an objective with another mortal unit and just score an easy 2 points. So that's probably the very first one that I find the easiest to immediately include in your planning for a list. Is like, this is probably the one I can get first turn in many cases. The next one I would probably look at as well is this Grand Feast for the gaining 12 depravity with the euphoric killers when planning your list, and probably including a fast cavalry unit or even a very fast keeper of secrets. This is something that your opponent may have a hard time denying you because 12 depravity, just outputting 12 damage from a very killy source in our unit or killy unit, is something that they can't really deny since we can pick that battle. Just send those Slick Blade Seekers into a unit of Clan Rats, and we're looking pretty good. Or
I thought Excessive Carnage was another one that I like. Look, if someone puts on like a cheap unit to tag an objective to get 1-2 more, if you've got like a decent killer unit that you'll do euphoric killers on, you can probably clear those 10 objective scorers, those 5 idiots that are holding. Obviously, it's situational, and not everyone's going to have that, but that could be a nice little turn 1 or even turn 2 one too.
Absolutely. So the combination here of Grand Feast and Excessive Carnage is that it's almost the same tactic. And it really leans into what the army wants to be doing anyways, using euphoric killers to gain us depravity. One of them puts a hard count, of course, in Grand Feast, but then Excessive Carnage, if it's a unit that has less than ideal or less than an amount of, I want to say this, less wounds than what we would ideally want to gain some depravity. Like if it's just a leftover unit of a battle line, like 2 Liberators, and there's a better unit that's juicier for euphoric killers on the other side, you're kind of foregoing those depravity points to get this battle tactic, which works out. You're getting the 2 points for the game to overall win the match, but now you're potentially losing euphoric killers as a decent target. So it definitely comes down to the circumstances. You have 2 different battle tactics that essentially want to do the same thing. It's definitely a win in our book as giving us those options. But then I also like Death by 1,000 Cuts, since we're probably going to bring shooting, put a couple shots into the same unit, and that's a free 2 points. Really, really love that. Use this a lot in the last book as well. So I'm glad it carried over. And what I see with Enrapturing Blur, it's essentially another this one's mine, but any unit can do it since you just pick that hero that's taking no wounds, and you just gotta take the hero before it gets a chance to activate in the combat phase. So I really like this one as well. If you find the hero out there that tried to be a little aggressive, maybe a Grave Seer that teleported up the board, or a hero that just set an objective, especially on like battle plans like Twists and Turns, maybe that just was holding it by himself. Just run someone up there and take Enrapturing Blur here.
Even Depraved Unity, when you think about it, right? Pick an objective you don't control, and as long as you have one friendly mortal and one friendly demon unit contesting, like you could just not deploy on a home objective, then move 2 people on, boom, you score it. Assuming you've obviously got at least one mortal and one demon. If you have none, if you don't have one or the other, then you can't do it. But that straight away is just don't deploy on your home objective. Turn 1, move them on, you score it. You're laughing.
Yep. I was always struggling in some battle plans to figure out what I can do. So this is absolutely a very good call out and leaves it absolutely open to us to just have a very easy first turn battle tactic and save Desecrator Cunning for later.
Yeah, I always try to save Desecrate till like round the 5, right? Because when things are dead or almost dead, I want to have something available up my sleeve as a last resort. I always try to have like something that isn't turn 1 Desecrate. A couple of these are great options depending on if your opponent goes first, if you go first, who moves up and how they move up. And I guess it kind of shows you that you shouldn't always just be melee. Having a couple of shooting units are going to be beneficial. And this is a perfect segue to let's talk about your 2 lists, because you have submitted 2 lists. One list is an Invaders list. It's Glutton for Depravity as the grand strat. You got the Keeper of Secrets, General, Best of the Best, Shining Ages, and the Flaming Weapon. No surprise to see Flaming Weapon on a Keeper of Secrets. I was wondering if you're going to talk about that because I'm like, we haven't spoken about Flaming Weapon yet. Contorted Epitome with the icon of Infinite Excess, Lash of Slaanesh, and Tunnel Master being a General's Handbook Season 2 ability. If you're watching this in the future, the mask, you've got the Lord of Pain with the Arcane Tome and Lash of Slaanesh. So curious to find out why you've gone 2 of the same spell down the track. You've then got 3 units of Blitzbarb Archers, a unit of Blitzbarb Seekers, 2 units of Slickblade Seekers, and the Mesmerizing Mirror coming in at 1975, wrapped up in a little command entourage in Magnificent, Battle Regiment, and Galatian Sharpshooters. Whew. How does this work? What does it do? What's the combinations? Give me a bit of a feel of this particular list.
All right. So ultimately, you see the mask in here, and you see how many battalions we're bringing here. So we're going pretty high drop with this one. But starting first with your deployment and everything, the mask being able to perform that deep strike 3 inches away at the start of the battle before we decide priority puts some decisions in our opponent's mind as to whether they want to deal with this mask first or give the turn away and allow us to do all of our shenanigans with this mask maybe being near an important unit. But in Invaders, of course, all of these units will be generals and have very good coverage around the battlefield. You see the artifact here being the icon of Infinite Excess. The whole goal of this army is to really create some lanes and set up a good turn to send in a lot of the units, be it some of the Slick Blades or this Keeper Secrets with some extra attacks, having best of the best. But once again, you may see that there's 3 non-unique heroes in here. So the Keeper being able to use the Escalating Havoc to add an additional command trait in that Hurler of Obscenities is going to give it that opportunity to let other non-unique heroes copy it on that roll of a 2+. So now we have 3 units that could potentially hand out 3 -1 saves that these units can then go into and really kind of deal with. I lean a little bit into the shooting here. So we have that -1 to save ability with these Blitzbarb Seekers, which I think are going to be an auto take in a lot of folks' lists. There's some matchups where they might not do anything, such as Nighthaunt, but ultimately versus everyone else, getting some shots in there with these poisoned arrows to do that -1 to save is going to affect them for the rest of the turn, and allow these other Bliss Barb archers to kind of pile on top. Having the Lord of Pain in here and having it be a general opens us up to potentially adding in Twin Souls or a unit of Painbringers if you want a different mortal unit. Hellstriders could also work here, but I like the archers as a nice way to tear up a screen and then let these units that now have the hurler, fast slick blades, get into whatever the screens we're trying to protect. So Keeper Secrets of Best of the Best will get that +1 to attacks if it's near another one of our units or another one of our heroes or an enemy hero. And then if the timing is looking good based on the circumstances, pop the Icon of Infinitive Access for an extra attack on all of our units from the Epitome. So Keeper now has 6 sword attacks, 4 claw attacks, and we have the Flaming Weapon on here, which, giving it to the sword, is going to increase damage output on that Keeper very significantly. Had a nice little case where I took this list up against some KO. KO moved up the board, did some shooting to me. It was very good. Really targeted those archers, but on the pop back, the Contorted Epitome in this case managed to make its charge in first and kind of use its ability to shut off commands to protect from Unleash Hell, send in the Keeper against an Ironclad, and then do significant damage since they both had the Hurler, giving it a -2 to saves, roaring, all that good stuff. And then Mesmerizing Mirror is in here as like another source of depravity generation that you kind of hinted to at the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah, it's a great fallback. Like I would probably run the Mesmerizing Mirror, especially again as people are waking up to not accepting your dice. I do want to loop back quickly to the mask, because one thing that I really like now is that you can, after deployment, but before the first battle round begins, remove the mask from the battlefield and set it up in enemy territory so long as it's outside of 3 inches. So I guess my question is, do you, because that's a Desecrate the Land right there. That one hero could be scoring turn 1 Desecrate. So I guess just because you can, do you? When do you put it into enemy territory and when don't you? Because it has a 4-up ward, but it only has 5 wounds. So if it's close to the enemy, they die pretty quickly.
Well, it sometimes just becomes a threat that your opponent has to deal with and take the first turn and point their shooting units at it. What I like as a concept is deploying it into cover, so it gets that extra bonus. 3 inches, just gives it a lot of play in these cases. But if you have a good chance, say for example, your opponent outdrops you and has way more drops in the list that has the mask, well, now you have that option to really drop it into a very good terrain piece that you can just score, Desecrate, and save your other easy battle tactics for later. But I really like it as a piece to force decisions onto your opponent, potentially giving them first, having them deal with the mask. In this case, if your opponent is playing something that has Mighty Destroyers, just turn that off with this mask, deploying right in front of them, giving you a little bit of protection for a turn and letting things just kind of smooth easy. Because with this list, it really is building towards a pretty powerful push for 1 turn with the Keeper Secrets and the Slick Blades. So you want to create that opening, maybe have your opponent out of position to really get the most use out of that icon and the Hurler Obscenities, because it is a 2-up. It should often go off, but dice is dice. It may not work, and so now you have to wait for that other opening to come up.
Yeah, no, just because it's a great trade piece, but I can see people using it too often, and then it just a sacrificial dies in turn 1 because you didn't think this through properly, and you've just wasted 140 points, right? So just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's a great way to tag an objective. It could score you Desecrate. It could do other things, but just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of play, a lot of thought, a lot of decisions we have to make on our own, and coming to the table with a plan with that battle tactic is just going to be good. But I really like it for those destruction matchups and just trying to block something off, turn off that Mighty Destroyers, and just see how that plays out. But always look for cover. She does have a 5-up save, I believe.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah, so you definitely want to keep it in a good spot where your opponent may not immediately kill it. I had it survive a couple of heroes that charged into it, and it was pretty cool because on my turn it healed up and was able to just keep the party going on her side. But
So
yeah,
this,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say this list. So we probably talked too much about the mask just for a 140 point hero. That was it was good. Like I'm glad we talked a little bit about it. But with the Keeper of Secrets, that's one of your key combat threats. Obviously, flaming weapon, great spell to improve the damage output. Lots of combinations and things to make that output improved. The Blitzbarb Archers using its special attack to kind of bring down saves, get some damage as well, as you've said, around trying to generate some of the temptation dice, and then your slick blades also do a bit of combat, and your mirror is also generating depravity. Or is that kind of like how this is all working together, and you're leveraging the speed of like the Bliss Barbs and the Seekers to tag objectives, score, pin, do Slaaneshy things?
Absolutely. Just really biding time, using the archers to remove screens that could really get in the way. And if the main turn for the push has to happen in round 2, then let it happen. But this is definitely more focused on really moving up the table and trying to take off a key piece on the opponent's side. Now the lash, since you brought it up, is just another way to like really have redundancy, since if an opponent is trying to be aggressive with you, being high drops, getting units up in your face, it really helps create a little bit of redundancy with that, and reducing their attacks, really getting some units in there with the slick blades. The archers really act as screens in this, and might evaporate if they get charged, but now that enemy targets up close to you, you don't really have to travel far anymore with the slick blades of the keeper, reduce their attacks, and now deal with those threats with reducing their attack output, which hopefully by the time you have the -1 to hit as well.
Yeah, and obviously you can't cast it twice at the same time, but you've got redundancy depending on either if your hero's dead, or if you have a better option, you can choose which one casts it and which one does Mystic Shield, Arcane Bolt, something generic on its war scroll. And I only asked that as well because you've obviously gone in and spent an artifact on the Lord of Pain to get it. So why? And that's a great example of why. Anything else about this list, or you want to move on to your second one?
Oh, we can move on to the second one.
Oh, let's get gluttonous. Let's get gluttonous.
Yeah.
And a lot of similarity here, and I will ask you very shortly why it's so similar. Like, how come you haven't gone into your demonettes, your fiends, your pain bringers? Like, there's so many things. Like, why is it this is your particular core? But the difference here is it's a pretenders list. Take what's there. So we've gone from a grand strategy from General's Handbook, Contorted Epitomes, the General, Strength of Godhood, the Crown of Dark Secrets, Phantasmagoria. You got Glutos. Love that, man. Glutos. And then you got Siggy as well, Sigvold as well. You've gone in with like 700 points of named character goodness. You've got the Lord of Pain with the Tunnel Master, the Shard Speaker of Slaanesh. You've gone 3 units of Blitzbarb Archers, a unit of Blitzbarb Seekers, and 1 unit of Slick Blades, where the previous one had 2. So you've gone much more hero hammer here, with a lot of your points in your heroes.
Absolutely.
So, and wrapped up in magnificent, commanding entourage with magnificent battle regiment and 1985 is the point. So a little bit more points, so less likely to get the choice of who goes first, and less likely to get the triumph here. So, well, actually, no. What's in your battle? How many drops is this one?
So this one should be 4. But I'm noticing that I think the artifact is missing here, but it should be the Arcane Tome on the Shard Speaker with the Born of Damnation spell.
Okay, it might not have come through, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So you've got the Arcane Tome and Born of Damnation is the spell. Sweet.
Yep. So we have our 2 picks.
How does this one work, and how is it different?
So this list tries to focus on really creating a stronger center, with Glutos being the main piece to really kind of put out there as a juicy target to come into. His -1 to hit aura, already kind of stacking up with the primary one that we can gain off of the 12 depravity points. But just really kind of creating a bait center with all these archers forming a good castle that we can all give Unleash Hell to. So usually as your front, kind of hiding behind Glutos or being near the Glutos center core, would require you to fire with the Blissbarb Seekers first, get some wounds through, make the target -1 to save, and then have the rest of the archers go through. So we're usually trying to aim for the strong core center with this one. The Stick Blades are going to be the unit that can go out and potentially grab your depravity early without running charge, hit a good unit, hit a flank, force your opponent to make decisions. But with the hero hammer aspect here, you kind of see the contorted epitome be the general in this case, need to have some protection, but has the Strength of Godhood and Phantasmagoria spell, so it can retreat it once it makes its hit into an enemy target. So 9 attacks, you're going to have your 3s and 4s base, and then, of course, Ren 2 if on those 9 attacks because of the String of Godhood, and then damage 2 on each. So it can really get into something juicy. I've tinkered around with Flaming Weapon on the Contorted Epitome as well if you really wanted to get really nasty with it. The massive move, getting out there, now it's a big piece that can just really slam into an opponent's shooting unit, shut off the Unleash Hell, and do a lot of damage to it.
I've got a burning question before we move off from Glutos. Have you done damage with the Liz stuff just yet? Like 12-inch range, 1 attack, 2s and 2s, no Ren for 6 damage. Like, I just want to see you attack a hero and you pop that minor hero with 1 attack, but it's such a casino gamble there.
I've unfortunately only been able to launch this into some chaff units because, obviously there's no Ren, but that's why the Shard Speakers here, the Blissbarb Seekers are here. It's like, oh, now that attack might have some Rend by reducing the saves on the enemy units. So, it's really stacking on some additional units that can bring the save stripping sort of item to the list with that Shard Speaker. So, really wanted to build around her utility. The Lord of Pain, since contesting an objective on him gives that +1 to hit, +1 to wound aura, even shooting, really helps out for those Unleash Hells that we can really spam a bit in this Pretenders list. But that Glutos shooting attack for 2s and 2s, 6 damage, I just absolutely love it. I've only been able to launch it into chaff units at the moment, and it's just like, wow, this is a little silly, but
I love that. It's a great way to get rid of chaff.
Yeah.
It's a great way to get rid of it. I mean, Glutos, 18 wounds, water 5 up. He heals based off, what is it? So there's the Gorge of Excess ability lets him heal up to 6 wounds. He's just an absolute tank. And -1 to hit, obviously, when you get to 12 depravity, you'll then be -2 to hit. Obviously, you only go maximum -1, but you'll stop an all-out attack, boosting it back up. So he's a very good centerpiece, especially in immortal builds.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then Lord of Pain, always keeping him on 2s and 2s on the profiles that matter is just really good. With this kind of combo, if you have your Lord of Pain, buffing your mortals, you really end up leaving behind some command points on the table with a Pretenders list, but it saves it for those extra rallies, making those rerolling some charges with Sigval and really trying to get him in there. But this type of list really wants to hunker down on center objectives or where the battle is going to be, and then kind of counterpunch with Sigval, a beefed up Contorted Epitome, and Glutos once the battle really starts going.
I noticed you've got this core of the Blissbarb Archers and the Seekers, and if someone didn't want to play around with as much shooting in their army, would you go into like I said, the Painbringers or the Twin Souls? Would you bring in Demonettes? Would you bring in Fiends? How would you tweak this if you wanted a bit more of a melee focus? And what are you trading if you didn't have as many of these Archers and Slick Blades that you currently have?
So in a Pretenders list, to bring in some of those mortal elite troops like your Painbringers and Twin Souls, we would have to make the Lord of Pain the general, since this is not invaders where they're unlocked. So the Lord of Pain could be your general in this one, and he has a better save than a Lord of Hubris, so it would make a good option for trying to hunker and protect as your general. I believe the wording would just require there to be a mortal general to unlock them. So I think you can make Glutos your general, forego the Strength of Godhood, and have that platform that can issue the commands. So,
what are you referring to? Which one?
So I'm referring to the Painbringers and the Twin Souls.
Battle line require... the general is a Lord of Hubris or a Lord of Pain.
Okay, so then that's for
the Painbringers.
Yeah.
And same with the Twin Souls. The Twin Souls are the same. Battle line, Lord of Pain or Lord of Hubris.
Yeah, so it would require, playing a little bit more cagey with that Lord of Pain being the general. Issue the command abilities to the smaller base, of course, but then you could bring in a unit of 5 Twin Souls, which I personally think are better as a unit of 5. Don't really need to reinforce them, but unless you're bringing an additional battalion like the Galatian veterans, since they unfortunately lost an inch of reach and an attack. But Painbringers, I think personally, are a little expensive at the moment. Their comparison is often going to Chaos Warriors, which are 220, have a mortal wound shrug, and decent buffs on their War Scroll, and I believe 2 attacks, which can get more. But Painbringers at 145, or for a reinforced unit 290, becomes a bit of a challenge to really fit into your list. And I think they're really solid on that 2-up save if you can meet those conditions. But it's just a bit hard to set up. It is conditional, of course, and then requires your Lord of Pain to be the general, which in a Pretenders list, you may want your Epitome or the Keeper of Secrets to be your general, maybe Glutos if that's what your list is all around.
Yeah, and folks, if you haven't noticed this by now, this is just one example. There's plenty of ways to build a Slaanesh list, and it's not to say that the way Edgar's built his list, it's an auto-include that you've always got to have those blitz barbs. But I think it's from your playstyle and the way you build around and the synergies, I really like what you've done there. Like if you wanted to bring in some Hellstriders, you probably could, and that would theme up with the cavalry, but you'd obviously lose a few things. And, there's some changes with like the charge on the Hellstriders with the claw spears, and there's some interesting changes in there. I guess it depends on how do you win. And I think you've just evidently told us a few times you like a strong core, and the rest of the army kind of works with that strong core.
Yeah, and the archers kind of also help with a little bit of that opportunity to offer the temptation dice, since now you have that extra spreading the love with these eras and having your opponent really make the decision of whether or not they want the DT mortals or to give you some ramped up depravity.
Yeah, that's really key, and I like that, because how do you offer some of the depravity in turn 1? We talked about it. Even just having some shooting is a great way to just bring that in a lot earlier than you normally would. Is there any endless spells that I know you've only got like Mesmerizing Mirror in one of them? Are there other endless spells, even like the universal ones, that might work for a Slaanesh? Whether it's, we talked earlier about Gnashing Jaws and the reducing of movement. Any other things that you think kind of synergize quite nicely with you?
Well, Glutos and the Slothful Super Spell really are going to enjoy those Gnashing Jaws. The Purple Sun, with all of our abilities to reduce saves being cast by an Epitome, is also a pretty good pick. Those archers, if you have Bliss Barb Seekers, are now potentially Ren 3 if that sun is placed in a good spot. But our casting, unfortunately, is pretty mediocre, and in the middle, just the Epitome is the one that rerolls. Glutos has to wait. Otherwise, we have to be pretty honest, and you're kind of bringing an endless spell that your opponent could potentially easily deny you. But I do like the Dreadful Visage from Slaanesh. That strike last and doing some additional mortal wounds as well. Just really lets us spread out our attackers and our fast cavalry and pick a target, and then comfortably be able to hit the second target if we need to. And it's got a pretty decent range. Cast within 12, moves 8, and then affects something within 6.
I remember it being quite generous. I'm like, oh, that's not too bad.
Oh, yeah.
Not bad at all.
I really like that option. Our army is pointed a little bit high, in my opinion, and if we ever see some drops, could probably fit some more. I think we have room for one endless spell most of the time in our book.
Yeah, I do agree with you that there are some things where it's just like it's a little bit like you could shave like 10 or 20 points off certain things, and
Mhm.
collectively you'd have a little bit more. It's not aggressively overpointed, but there are some things like when I looked at Glutos, I'm like, are you still 480? Like, yeah, you couldn't be at the 420 that you used to, like maybe 460, but we're splitting hairs at this point. But it's good to see you weren't overly kind of pointed. Just bring down a little.
Yeah, we could see some shavings in the future. Maybe some battle scrolls, I think, coming up
Probably
this
not the
year. Maybe
Battle
drop it.
Scroll. Maybe the
Yeah,
next General's
yeah,
Handbook in June, July. Maybe
yeah.
this Battle Scroll. Let's not paint too much optimism for our Slaanesh people.
Oh, I'm not talking about this one. Just in the future. Like if we get some drops
Yeah,
there, I would like to see a little bit of
yeah.
shaving at some point.
I've got a
Yeah.
couple of final questions, and we'll bring it home. All right.
Oh yeah.
I know it's getting a little bit late. I appreciate this talk. 2.5 hours. It's been really good, and we haven't even gotten into the weeds of the War Scrolls. And
Hmm.
I don't think we need to. I think it comes down to what's the theme of your army. How do you want to win? What are you building around? Are you summoning? Are you trying to get the most and get mortal wounds? Are you trying to like? How do you want to build your list? And I love that you've got so many great options. You talked about bringing in certain things from Slaves to Darkness and from Beasts of Chaos. There's a lot of great things that you can tap into that works for you. But how do you win with Slaanesh? Given how tricksy it is, how fragile it can be, how movement is such a critical piece to your game, how do you win?
All right. So what I have noticed a lot in some of the games is the army really wins by neutralizing or debuffing the opponent's main units and main core to really buy time for our depravity to kick in, to remove those key pieces and be very surgical. Um, really just gain momentum throughout the entire battle and just really take the opponent's units out of the battle where your opponent really can't interact with you. And I see a lot of the term non-playable interaction really come up, and um, it just becomes very interesting to see the army play out, being that glass cannon, being very, I want to say, very sensitive to damage, but being able to surgically insert itself and just impose its will on the opponent. Some armies can definitely counter it pretty efficiently with shooting and magic, but
Who,
we
who,
can play
who,
around this.
who are the threats? Who are the armies that you've got to consider how you defeat who are a key threat to you?
All right, really got to consider Luminef. Their cast is really really strong. Gits overall can replace itself, and as you remove their units, they just come back. They never go away. And then of course you've got um, Beasts of Chaos, which won't be on the field when you start. So you kind of really have to pick your and choose and let them kind of come to you in this point, since you don't know where they're going to drop off. And then I like to see some Skaven builds are pretty effective with their casting and their ability to really hunker down, but provide us some really good targets for depravity. But a lot of these armies that are currently doing really well at the top, I've seen KO builds also that we could struggle against. Those frigates loaded with chainsaw boys, they're ready to come out. But any army that can really get into our face early, remove a lot of the pieces that we need to, especially in pretenders, um, really hunker down the whole plan. Our keepers that we're building up and really and paying 400 points for. If they're not able to really earn their points back in good timing, we can really suffer a lot. And in
So
pretenders, you
things
just got
like
to be mindful. Go ahead.
Iron Jaws, Suns, even like some of the Corn Demon builds who can be quite aggressive. Those are types of things you got to watch out for.
Yes, anything that can really put a lot of damage forward. If we're losing too many units in our army too early, it's just going back to the drawing board and saying, how can I screen a little bit better? How can I keep my main pieces better protected? Just because this army really depends on that. Since our summoning we don't need to rely on our summoning as much as we did in the past. We cannot replace our pieces anymore and can actually play with what's on the board. But that Revel in Depravities table, we really want to ramp that up a little bit. So with our debuffs, let's let our opponents kind of hit us with wet noodles, and I think we're okay.
It's a very techie army. It's not an Iron
Mhm.
Jaws, go up to your opponent, smash him in the
No.
face. It's not leveraging what used to be just move forward, strike first, crush them before they could strike back. It's a lot more nuanced, a lot more technical. That's going to kind of work with certain play styles. But Edgar, before we kind of bring this home, is there anything that you want to add to the Slaanesh discussion before I ask you a couple of final things?
I'm just really excited to see where our book continues to go. I was before already leaning into some control aspects and trying to use the Johnny tech and the overlaying debuffs and buffs to our own units. So I'm very happy to see that the book took this direction overall and just plays harder into that. Ultimately, the sub factions go very deep. We have so much play, and with the war scrolls out there that we have in our book, we're now able to bring them over. In the past, Sigvald carried this book on his back very hard, and he was in every list almost. All the war scrolls coming up to his level now doesn't make him an auto include anymore, in my opinion. But that just goes to show how good the book has come and the strides it's made, and I think we've paid for our sins. And so, Sigvald, thank you for your service. Let's play with some more war scrolls as well. Would be one of my comments as well.
That's all right. Sigvald's
Yeah.
coming to me with my Slaanesh
Yeah.
Slaves, the Darkness Army.
Yeah.
Like, yep,
Oh
I need
yeah.
you. All right. If you could add one war scroll or one thing to the book in the next iteration, or maybe a campaign book. By the way, love Sinessa and Dexessa. That addition to it's so good. I love those two models. What would you add to Slaanesh if you could?
So I think we need our mounted hero back. So what I'm looking at here is the kind of build that I put together was like a Lord of Avarice on Exalted Seeker, trying something to play with our mounted cavalry a little bit. Looking to have this hero have like a glaive, a range 2 of 6 attacks, 3s and 3s, 2 damage. 14-inch move, 6 bravery, 5 up save. Make him a little bit, delicate, but put him around 6 wounds, 160 points, but have a bit of a bodyguard ability where he can fight and let his Slickblade guard or anyone near him fight as well. And potentially maybe add some attack to his glaive as well. It's like a potential unit that could just be a hero that can run up the board, not be the full 200 points, but just be something that can go out and grab some depravity 3-4 killers as well. Would be too spicy if it was maybe a bit of a play into, how I want to say it, the Lord Draconis from Stormcast, but maybe letting a unit of Bliss Barb Seekers fire an extra time, So just someone that really motivates our cavalry to go out there and just let this be our Lord of Avarice on Exalted Seeker. Or
I like it.
If it's on a regular Seeker, let it happen. I would just like to see us have a mounted Lord.
I'd love some more varieties on Keepers of Secrets. Like you look at Khorne, you got 3 different versions plus Scarbrand. I'd love some more varieties of, and whether they're named Keepers of Secrets or other options to build it. I don't know. For me, I love the Keeper of Secrets. It's an army. It's that, and that's why I mentioned like I love Sinessa and Dexessa, and I love those types of models. So if I had, I don't know, I know like in fantasy battles there was a named Keeper of Secrets, starts with N, like Necari, I can't remember what it's called.
Okay.
I don't know. For me, I'd love to see more named Keepers of Secrets and do a better job than Shellaxi, Shellaxi Hellbane, that's it.
Yeah, I got mine right here, just kind of chilling around,
She's all right.
I
like her.
Working, but yeah, I think her war score definitely got improved. I just don't think the improvements were enough. And then the points, they made her more expensive than a normal keeper. Okay.
Make her Scarbrand, but for Slaanesh. Make her a Scarbrand equivalent, and I'm a buyer.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe not like Scarbrand, but like just like so powerful and so great. At the moment, it's just like, you're okay.
Yeah, it tries to be defensive and offensive at the same time. No, you can't do it. And Scarbrand, I think, is even less points than Shellaxi at the moment.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, probably. It's anyway. Anyone you want to shout out? Anyone you want to like? If people want to find you, where are people? You're on Discord. You're on Twitter. Like, where can people chat to you if they want to talk about Slaanesh list tech?
Absolutely love helping anyone in your Discord as well, and I've been having some fantastic conversations in that Hedonites of Slaanesh channel. Folks are bringing some fantastic ideas. I'll sometimes linger around the Bottom 2 Bullies Twitter, but most of the time you will find me at events and got a full slate. Looking forward to this upcoming season. Got Atlantic City Open coming up, Summer Slaughter, Nova, some other GTs that are coming up in November just for like charity events. So you'll always catch me out at those events, and I'm looking forward to continue to bring Slaanesh to events and see how we do. And something spicy, got to play a Slaanesh mirror match. So I mean, if we look at those in the future, it's the gameplay in the Slaanesh versus Slaanesh game is just very interesting. So I had an event. I'm kind of looking forward to doing it again. But it's just very interesting. And then I'm going to give a shout out to a War Scroll first. Going to give a shout out to Slangor, which I hope more people try out because it's just so good. I think they're fantastic. But
it's funny you say that because when I did my Beasts of Chaos review and then I did it again here, I'm like, did Slangor get a glow up? And like, I wanted to say yes, and I did. I put myself out. I said, look, I think Slangor are the best they've ever done. They've had a glow up, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get blown back, and people are going to go, they're still rubbish. And I'm surprised that we've got some converts. I'm glad when I like them. I like, one, they're a cool model, but two, they've actually now got some play. And if it's ever going to be a time that Slangor do well, it has to be now. Like, this is their birthday. It's their time.
Yep. It is absolutely. Today had some extra matches, and there was 4 total Slaanesh players in our group. And we're like, hey, let's just mount up a massive battle here. Had some converts to the army. Saw Slangor firsthand. They're like, oh, we got to go out and get some. But yeah, ultimately, looking forward to see what our gaming club does, and again, over here on the East Coast, we have a fantastic club scene. So shout out to the Bottom 2 Bullies. Shout out to Matt Obringer, my battle buddy that we travel to events at. So you always catch us at these giant GTs. So looking forward to it and to meeting more folks from the community. Now that, Slaanesh and Korn are up there and can really do some good stuff. But in particular, we don't have to jump through all these hoops, like I mentioned earlier, and potentially still suffer. We can actually put a game together and offer our opponent treats and temptation dice.
I tell you what I saw recently. Actually, it was kind of a little conversation I was having on Twitter. The rare times that I jump on Twitter these days, but we're like, the temptation dice should be like sex dice. Like, you can buy those little role play sex dice. Like, have 6 dice, like the Zinch have separate dice, and they can offer the random dice. I mean, I like your candy better, but it's a very, if you want to be on that side of like temptation, maybe I should go get an affiliate link from some sex dice manufacturer. Maybe Baron of Dice will start making Slaanesh temptation dice. I don't know, but you can have fun with it. I think that's the key. Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall and watch people have that interactive experience around temptation dice. Like, can I tempt you? Like, what if you take this? And like, you could be like really weird, like, it's not weird, but like seductive, but also like have a lot of fun with it. In a safe way. Like, don't be a creep. But yeah, I think it's cool. It's fun. It's my type of thing.
I don't know if you've heard of Hershey's chocolates, but Hershey Park is about 20 minutes from me. So I've got the factory right here. And so Hershey Kisses or Hershey Pieces is like what I have available to me to really offer to my opponent. Maybe like in the first round, because I think 30 pieces of chocolate in a game might be a little much. But I mean, if they're into it, sure. It is Slaanesh.
It's excess. It is excess. Like have a little dice. It's like a 6 and a little chocolate. You're like, can I tempt you? Can I give you this 6?
Yeah.
And like just keep, and like maybe like if they deny you the first time, you then offer them 2 chocolates. You're like, how about now? And
one of my games. Okay.
That's the thing I love about this. But Edgar, thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I can't wait to see the evolution of Slaanesh. You have paid for your sins. It's good. I mean, look, there's some things that, yes, put it back in the oven. It's not quite done yet. Yes, there are some things that you're probably paying a little bit over costed at the moment, but these kind of things will get fixed up in time. Yes, some people probably don't like the temptation dice, but I love it, and I think it's thematical. It's going to be fun, and I can't wait to see how people use it throughout the game. I think it's going to be a learning experience. It's not going to be as easy as you think. And over time, how do you generate that depravity when your your opponents get smarter?
Oh yeah,
that's what I'm curious about.
Yep, folks are going to catch on, and the temptations will get a little difficult, but we got to pull through and use the resources available to have our opponents see Slaanesh, and eventually when Slaanesh breaks out of their prison, maybe that temptations get a little bit stronger again. But yeah, really looking forward to it, and I love the ability to have where the book is bringing us and the future we have with it for the next couple of seasons. Yeah.
On that note, everyone, let me know in the comments if you what you think about it. Think about how did we go? Not how we go. I don't want your feedback on our performance, but I want to know from you in the comments what your thoughts are around the army. Are you a big fan of certain combinations? Are there things that maybe we didn't touch upon that you think are worth considering? Maybe we put in too much weight on those Blitzbarb archers and you found that they haven't worked for you. Let me know in the comments section. We'd be curious to hear from you how we go with Slaanesh, and we all kind of learn together as a little community. But thank you so much, Edgar. Thank you for everyone who watched this or listened to it on a replay. And I will see you all again on the next live stream or video.
Thank you very much, Coach. Catch you around.
Cheers all. Bye.
Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a 1-1 on a spellcast.